At the center of the world lies the white snowfield, a blasted sea of ice and jagged glaciers. A white serpent that devours glaciers and reshapes the land as it feeds. A white bear stalks the fields, each step triggering earthquakes. Even the coasts are not safe, since hideous rats pollute the oceans around the ice. An emperor once survived the snowfield, and warns that the most dangerous things there were not the monsters. The white snowfield itself hides something more terrible than the beasts, the barbarians. A figure fights through the storm, closing in with arthropod creatures and slamming them aside with raw strength, shattering ice as if it were nothing. Snow breaks. The barbarian endures savage attacks and answers with a roar, absorbing strikes and returning raw, bone-breaking force. The insects fall in heaps, while they overpower them. He evades a charging monster. Speed leaves streaks in the air as creatures are cut down, the barbarian's movements precise and deadly even in a whiteout. Inside the tribe, there is friction as one named Ketal mocks the barbarian's methods, calling them reckless. A barbarian girl takes the insult literally and asks if brainless is tasty, which only annoys the mocking man further. The barbarians start eating their prey. Ketal approaches and scolds the tribe for wasting precious rations, noting it has not even been a week and their stores are gone. He will not tolerate further carelessness. The barbarians try to play up their foolish stunt as a magnificent challenge, while other tribe members stare in disbelief. Moments later, one of the barbarians convulses, collapsing to the snow, and the camp erupts in alarm with shouts of his name. The situation shifts from foolish to critical in an instant. The tribe attempts crude resuscitation while the barbarian watches, unruffled. Someone screams for Greta to wake up, as Ketal simply exhales against the wind. Responsibility lands on him by default in this emergency. Voices cry for Greta to rise, while Ketal turns away to stare into the falling snow. He thinks to himself that this life, this harsh reality, is not what he had once wanted. Years before he became a legend, the man had wanted a fantasy life of dreams and magic. He quit his job and traveled to the highest peaks and the deepest places, chasing wonder as if it were a destination. The montage explains why he left behind ordinary life for the unknown. He even reached the southernmost points hoping the world would bend into magic, but nothing happened, and reality remained stubbornly mundane. Each night he prayed to be transported to fantasy, which eventually sets the stage for what comes next. At last the prayer was answered with a cosmic event, a bright swirl of light that broke the ordinary world. That supernatural phenomenon is the inciting call that will change his life, the moment fantasy and reality begin to collide. A merchant caravan presses across the white snowfield, the mercenaries grumbling about the cold as wagons creak on. The blonde captain snaps at complaints, reminding them all that they agreed to the risk when they signed on for this escort. There is no turning back, only endurance. One mercenary admits the storm is worse than expected, as the butler fusses over his charge inside the carriage. The noblewoman is checked on with gentle concern, while the escort on the outside strains against the weather, reminding everyone how fragile this passage really is. Lady Milena Akasha answers that she is fine and reminds her attendants to treat the mercenaries with respect. Inside the carriage, she acknowledges the danger, noting that these men are the only ones willing to escort them across the white snowfield, which explains why she refused to shelter the outsiders earlier. The noblewoman urges her butler to bring the mercenaries inside, because they look freezing, but he refuses, warning that the snowfield harbors threats best kept outside. His refusal highlights how even compassion must bow to hard survival rules in this place. Milena wonders aloud if the danger is simply monsters, and the narration takes her back to an emperor who once marched entire armies into the ice. He sought conquest there, and personally led the charge, a choice that would have terrible consequences for those who followed him. Years later, the emperor returned alone, an older, broken man who had lost countless soldiers. He spoke as if mad, claiming monsters lived there, but insisting the greatest danger was something else entirely. His testimony lent weight to a rumor nobody could dismiss easily. The legend clarifies its target. Barbarians, not the beasts, are the terrible residents of the snowfield. A fur-clad silhouette with glinting eyes embodies that warning, a hellish people said to dwell where no one else returns alive. The butler dismisses the emperor's tale as legend, but Milena remembers that many of the monster descriptions were later verified. Still, he points out that no one has ever confirmed seeing a barbarian, which leaves the story lodged between rumor and proof. Milena agrees that the record is incomplete and calls the caravan to a stop. The command rings out and wheels grind to a halt, the group bracing to inspect whatever lies ahead. Their shared unease shifts into attention. A scout halts and reports something in the white ahead, and the captain asks for clarity. Visibility is poor, and everyone strains, expecting the worst in a place where the unknown usually delivers trouble. From the captain's vantage point, the shape is small, which he offers as good news, while he withholds the bad until they can see more. The men whisper and edge forward, tension stretching thin in the cold air. A single figure approaches through the wind, and inside the carriage heads turn at the unexpected silhouette. The captain grips his weapon and finally says what everyone is thinking, asking if the thing coming toward them could actually be human. The figure resolves into a massive man wrapped in furs, stepping through the blizzard with casual purpose. When his eyes glow purple, the camp feels something like pressure, a recognition that the story of barbarians may be more than legend. The men whisper the single word, barbarian, and the stranger stops close enough to speak. His face is half in shadow, his eyes bright and unreadable, and every mercenary freezes as if the name itself were a threat. The barbarian greets them with a dry, teasing remark that he had come out because he was tired of looking at his own kind, and he admits surprise at finding outsiders. He identifies himself as Ketal, the Ashen Barbarian, and smiles, offering a polite "pleased to meet you" that contrasts with his savage reputation. Ketal peers at the wagons and confirms they escort a merchant. The captain stammers that they are indeed mercenaries, and the barbarian calmly advises turning back, predicting that they will not follow that sensible advice. His tone leaves no room for argument. Ketal asks directly if the employer is inside the carriage, and then makes the blunt offer to be hired as an additional escort. The request alarms the captain, but also clarifies Ketal's purpose, turning a threat into a mercenary proposition. He repeats the offer to help them cross, and the captain voices the obvious distrust, asking if Ketal plans to harm them. The question hangs in the air, as everyone gauges whether a legendary barbarian can be trusted to protect them. Ketal replies that if he intended harm, they would already be dead, which silences the mercenaries. The captain hesitates, weighing the risk, because the presence of a dangerous ally might be preferable to relying on his small company in these conditions. A liaison relays the conversation to the carriage, and Milena listens quietly. The message is simple and startling. The barbarian requests employment as protection. Inside, the decision now depends on whether the employer will accept his terms. Milena asks what would happen if they tried to fight him, and the butler answers bluntly that he would not recommend it. The consensus inside tilts toward negotiation rather than violence, because the barbarian's capability is too great to risk. Milena gives a steady order to accept Ketal's offer, and the liaison prepares to return the answer. The deal is struck by command rather than debate, and the mercenary worldliness recognizes that sometimes the best armor is the strongest stranger. The captain steps forward to confirm the hire, and Ketal allows a thin smile, calling it great news. The mercenaries remain wary, having agreed out of necessity rather than trust, as Ketal's presence promises power and uncertainty in equal measure. Ketal moves into the carriage's personal space and instructs the men that they should not be afraid, calling them employees, while insisting on speaking directly with their employer. The captain warns him not to attempt anything strange, holding to his duty even as he relays the decision. Ketal promises to keep the captain's warning in mind, and then follows toward the carriage. When a subordinate asks if the face has been authorized, the captain confirms that the employer herself approved, placing the responsibility on Milena. A junior suggests preventing the face, but older men scoff at the idea, unwilling to test Ketal's strength. The group recognizes that confrontation with him would be folly, so they hold position and watch as he approaches the carriage. Inside the carriage, the butler nearly panics at the thought of admitting a barbarian, but Milena urges composure. A knock sounds and Ketal asks politely if he may enter, which sends the butler into a visible panic despite the request's plain courtesy. Milena allows him entry with a cautious invitation, and Ketal accepts, stepping into the heated interior with a composure that belies the cold outside. The informal meeting begins as the carriage doors swing shut on the storm. Once inside, Ketal asks for calm and explicitly says he has no intention of harming them, trying to set a tone of negotiation rather than violence. The butler angrily refuses to be soothed, unable to reconcile the legend with the man before him, and calls him a liar. Milena recovers from shock enough to offer a polite, if trembling, greeting. Ketal returns the courtesy with equal civility, and the two settle into a formal exchange that feels like a truce being carved from tension. Ketal notices the carriage is unusually warm, and Milena explains that magic maintains the interior heat. He acknowledges the fact with a quiet "I figured," showing that he understands the workings of this world well enough to read enchanted conveniences. Ketal warns that safe passage is improbable, and offers to protect the caravan for the journey. He makes his proposal practical and blunt, but adds that his service comes with a single condition, which prompts Milena to ask what he wants in return. Ketal's condition is not gold or weapons, but information, a demand to learn about the world beyond the Snowfield. He asks Milena to give him everything she knows, and she acknowledges the request, which turns the negotiation into an exchange of knowledge for protection. Ketal smiles and assures her, yes, it won't harm you in any way. Milena thinks that she does not even have a choice in the first place, and then answers quietly, okay. The butler reacts angrily off to the side, while Ketal follows up with, good. What's your name? Milena inclines politely and states, I'm Milena. She adds, I'm Milena, from the Akasha household. Her voice is formal and steady as she identifies her family and position. Ketal introduces himself with a broad grin. I'm Ketal. He follows with, let's get along well. The brief exchange seals a fragile agreement as the chapter beat closes. I longed to be in a fantasy world, and one day when I opened my eyes, I found myself as a barbarian in a snowy field. There was no time to figure out what happened, because everything that existed there were terrible, cold, and insanely strong monsters. I led my tribe across the snow plains, hunting and pulling them back to survive. Without knowing how much had passed, I spent countless years trying to get out of that terrible snowfield. Just when I thought it was hopeless, an interface appeared with a clear rule. Quest not completed. You can leave the snowfield once you've completed the quest. The constraint changed everything. I could not leave the snowfield because of some unknown force, so when hope faded, I began searching for others who had come from another world. I traveled the plains to find anyone who might explain why we were trapped and how the rule worked. Beyond the snowfield there was the fantasy world I had once dreamed of, and from that point I stopped merely surviving and started grinding quests in earnest. One recurring task appeared as an objective box reading, Quest 295, hunt the lizard within the given time. It became my path forward. I trampled monsters and completed the quests one by one until quest 295 completed, flashed, and the next objective appeared. With a single thought that someday I would leave, I kept pushing through every assignment the system gave me. Katal notes that most of the people he met outside panic and either draw swords or lose their heads. But this conversation is different, because Malena communicates coherently. He admits that spending so long around barbarians made talking to civilized people feel like a relief to his mind. Ketil asks, "Are you guys moving weapons?" Malena answers, "Ah yes. How did you know?" He explains simply that the sharp sound of iron from the carriage could not be unheard, and then asks quietly, "Is there a war going on outside?" Malena confirms. The Empire and the Kingdom are currently at war. She explains that although the Empire pushes forward with overwhelming numbers, the Kingdom is not easily pushed back because the Swordmaster and the hero guard the border. The wartime context explains why arms shipments are urgent. Katal repeats, "Hero, Swordmaster, what kind of strength do they possess?" Malena responds, "Katal, do you not know about mystery?" and admits she has never left the Snowfield before. She prepares to explain the layers of power called mystery. Malena explains that only a few people can sense or use mystery, and that it is graded into 5 ranks. First, she lists third, rate, those who can only sense the power. Then second, rate, who can use mystical abilities. Next is first class, those who can embody mystery into mana or aura, which includes knights, wizards, and spirit masters. She continues that beyond first class are the superhuman, people who control and manipulate the mysteries and can split and divide heaven and earth, and above them stands the hero. The hero is a legendary being who influences the world beyond mystery's ordinary rules. Malena points out that the very fact strength is quantified and named is proof of power, and that even third-rate users can be strong in a small territory. Ketil then says plainly, "I wish to see him." Malena registers the request and asks, "Sir Ketil? I cannot remember how long I have been trapped, and at first I was desperate simply to survive. All I know is that this place is a snowy field inside a fantasy world and I cannot run away from it. I really want to get out of here." Ketil answers himself with a single word, "No." He forces his mouth into a smile and vows, "I will get out of here no matter the cost." The promise hardens his expression. As the carriage jolts, Malena asks, "Sir Ketil, are you a barbarian?" He replies that it is good she asked, and that her expression shows she is aware of his presence. She admits she does because of the legend, and he responds, "A legend? About me?" Malena fumbles, surprised that he does not know. She recounts the Emperor's story from legend, and Ketil laughs aloud while reassessing the claim that the Emperor was merely mad. She allows, "Maybe your legend is true, because things like that have happened before." Ketil notes the number of carriages, and asks if they transport a great deal of weapons through the Snowfield. Malena hesitates, and then says quietly, "We are in need of a huge amount of money." He probes, why. She explains that the Akasha family has been merchants for generations, but fell into debt after being sabotaged by jealous nobles. This peddling is meant to prevent the family's downfall, and she admits they plan to sell weapons to the kingdom to pay off debt. Ketil sums up, noting the wartime market logic. Ketil reasons that if the empire pushes by quantity, then the kingdom, not the empire, becomes the buyer that needs weapons, which drives prices up enough to risk crossing the Snowfield. He then asks, does this territory border the empire? To confirm there is no easier route. Malena answers, it does. Her expression darkens as the old portrayal of barbarians as savages collapses, and she whispers, "WHO. Really? Are you?" The carriage trembles with a distant rumble. A sudden lurch hits the carriage and the butler shouts, "WH, what the?" Ketil turns toward the door as the convoy reacts to a new disturbance beyond the wheels. Ketil rises and scans the scene, calm and ready, and states simply, "Looks like we have an uninvited guest." The warning lands over the convoy as they prepare for contact. Outside the convoy, a black slime surfaces with a pulsing purple glow that makes the escort gasp. One mercenary exclaims in disbelief as Malena identifies it aloud, "A black slime?" The threat is one recorded in the Snowfield bestiaries. Ketil takes it in and says, "So that's what it's called." Malena explains that powerful returnees documented monsters of the Snowfield, and that the black slime is the most commonly recorded. She then asks him gently if he too is familiar with it. Ketil answers offhand, "Of course, they've got a chewy texture. Not bad as a snack." Malena recoils and stammers, "Pardon, a snack?" She declines nervously when he offers to catch one, and the mercenaries tense up for action. A heavy impact reverberates through the snow as the black slime strikes near the caravan, signaling that the engagement has begun and that the mercenaries must act quickly. The black slime surges onto the escort line, its mass cracking the air with a purple haze, and the troopers raise shields. Malena cries out urgently, Mr. Ketil," but he remains seated and watches the front line handle the threat. Ketil states to Malena with quiet clarity, "I made a contract with you." He reminds her, "I said I'd protect your lives." He then adds that he has no reason to step in unless there is real danger, implying that this level of threat can be managed by the escort themselves. He admits that more importantly, he needs to gauge the level of the outside world for himself, so he will observe. The black slime roars again and presses the mercenary line, giving the escort a chance to display their combat ability. The blonde captain orders, "Shields." Troopers respond and brace as the slime smashes into their line, forcing one trooper backward while the rest hold formation and absorb the corrosive impact. The scout rushes forward and slashes at the slime with a spear, but the creature answers with corrosive pulses that partially eat at the weapons. He yards back and then re-engages with a leaping strike as the close quarters probing continues. After a trooper is blasted and purple residue splashes the snow, the captain assesses the monster and shouts the key tactical insight that simple attacks will not work and that they must aim for the core inside. The formation splits and coordinates to exploit the slime's pathing. The mercenaries execute the plan, feinting and kiting to draw the slime along a straight path, while a second trooper cuts across to strike the exposed flank. Their coordinated movement begins to distort the creature's momentum. The scout keeps jabbing with his staff while the slime bellows and swells, and its momentum starts to falter as the troopers maintain spacing. A polearm is drawn and readied for a committed entry once the opening appears. A trooper plunges his spear in obliquely and yanks the slime aside, forcing it to whip its mass back and reveal a momentary weakness. The rest press the pressure to keep the creature oscillating and expose the interior core. The captain charges forward with a faint green aura around his blade and shouts, "Don't stop! Keep attacking!" The troopers bait another straight dash from the slime and hold their positions to generate the window the captain needs. Seeing that simple strikes will not penetrate, the captain commands, "Aim for the core inside." The troopers answer and align their strikes to trace the core's glow through the gelatinous body. As they prepare for a decisive blow, the captain raises his sword high and drives it down with channeled aura, a precise vertical strike that splits the slime and shatters the red core into smoking fragments. The monster's radiance dims as the core is destroyed. The black slime collapses into dissolving puddles as the shattered core ceases to glow, and the mercenaries erupt in cheers. We won! Malena exhales, "We did it!" while Catal watches in quiet reserve. Keto remains silent as the convoy catches its breath. Then a distant blue pulse ripples the air, and a lookout shouts, "Stop! Another monster!" A massive presence pushes through the snow haze toward the escort. A gigantic white beast barrels into the formation, and a trooper yells, "Aim for the neck!" Shields slam up, and multiple slashes intercept its lunges, buying the escort time against a force far stronger than the slime. A forward trooper is blasted back, and purple energy streaks across his cloak, leaving the formation rattled as the creature's roar spreads across the plain. The psychological pressure on the escort increases as they absorb the shock. Troopers exchange weary banter, one remarking that perhaps the Snowfield rumors are exaggerated, but the captain cuts through the levity and cautions, "Don't let your guard down. Down. We're not even halfway through." The convoy moves on with steady vigilance. A skeptical member of the escort asks aloud, "Are we sure that Barbarian is actually strong?" and suggests the legend sounds imperial. He accuses Ketal of being near the bottom of the Snowfield food chain and of leeching off them. Ketal remains impassive and says nothing. The captain looks toward Ketal and says, "At the very least, shouldn't we test his abilities?" Malena bites her lip, uneasy at the prospect of a public test that could breach the terms of their agreement. Ketchel studies the escorts from within the carriage as the captain steps forward and announces to Malena, "I have something to discuss with you, miss." She answers uncertainly, "Huh? A test?" And the negotiation for a demonstration begins. The captain warns they are risking their lives to carry out this request and reminds the escort that mercenaries keep their contracts. Milena answers that as mercenaries they only followed a contract, and that she is grateful they accepted the job. She admits others fled when they heard the crossing was dangerous and acknowledges the escorts gave her the one chance to try. Malena hesitates and admits there is one concern they cannot overlook. A trooper points out that the barbarian has never fought publicly and asks if he really deserves the special treatment he has been given. The captain explains they would like to verify whether the barbarian truly merits the privileges he receives, putting the agreement under quiet scrutiny. Malena asks if the escort means to test the barbarian's abilities. The captain admits he tried to stop his men, but they insisted on a demonstration. Catal steps out from the carriage and accepts the request, saying he does not mind being tested. Catal tells them now is not the time, explaining he has other guests who arrived first. The troopers react in confusion as a distant, contemptuous voice addresses the caravan and announces the arrival of weak little mortals from the outside world. The disembodied voice savors the sight of something exotic, and the mercenaries search the sky and the plain. The ground answers with a rising tension, as an enormous white serpent makes its presence known and the rank and file brace for a predator closing in on their caravan. The white serpent lashes its jaws and mocks the caravan, urging the mortals to scream because their cries enrich its flavor. The creature advances with cruel theatrics, and the escort scrambles to form a defense while the serpent revels in terror. A woman wakes with a start and says she is confused and wonders what is happening. Malena cries out under the serpent's oppressive aura, while the troopers strain to stand. Catal issues a single command to stop, and pushes a wave of force outward that begins to blunt the creature's pressure on the caravan. Ketal steps forward, and states that the people under his protection are his guests, and that the serpent must leave. His voice carries authority, and the creature recoils, sensing a rival presence and a shift in who controls the ground. The serpent questions why Catal stands outside his tribe's domain, and invokes the laws that protect the snowy plains. Catal replies that the serpent need not concern itself with his movements, rejecting the attempts at intimidation and refusing to back down. Quote, "The serpent proclaims its pride and promises of eternity and bristles at being told what to do." Catal answers that a command ignored is a challenge and prepares to fight, drawing the creature's full fury toward himself to protect the caravan. Quote, Ketal launches into motion, meeting the serpent's freezing onslaught and leading it away from the wagons. The two trade a brutal exchange that throws up shockwaves across the snowy basin, isolating the battle so the non-combatants can take cover. The serpent gathers its chilling power into a vast blue vortex that threatens to engulf the area. The caravan ducks and shields as the blast front rakes the ground, but, crucially, spares the wagons as Ketal holds the fight away from the party. A blinding explosion blooms where Ketal struck, and Malena staggers again from the fury of the aftershock. Her butler rushes to her side, calling out urgently, while the caravan huddles and waits for the dust to settle. The battlefield calms, and the serpent's labored groan confirms it has been subdued. Ketal's voice carries across the snowfield, remarking that some beings only learn after being beaten, and the immediate apex threat falls silent. Malena calls out to Ketal with worry. He assures her he will finish the engagement quickly and come back, telling her it will not take long, then steps off toward the last of the threat to resolve it definitively. Ketal launches high above the plain, a streak of purple energy, and dives toward the serpent's position. His descent is a single decisive blow intended to end the battle away from the caravan's location. A blue-white impact detonates on the plain as Ketal lands his finishing strike. The wave of energy sweeps outward and the serpent ceases hostilities, leaving a stunned quiet in the snow where the contest once raged. Blue motes of residual power rain down and then fade, while Milena and her butler peer toward the distant site to confirm safety. The escorts slowly stand, shaken but alive, and the caravan begins to recover its composure. The serpent's pleading voice is heard off, stage as it submits, and Ketal returns to the carriage and speaks calmly about why strangers may be hard to trust. The mercenaries peep from behind curtains, their earlier arrogance quieted by what they have witnessed. With the threat handled, the caravan resumes its crossing of the white snowfield toward the border. The butler coughs and steadies himself inside the carriage while Ketal rides close, scanning the horizon for any lingering danger. Ketal, now curious after the night's events, tells Malena that her clothing and speech suggest she is not a simple household representative, and asks why she risked her life for this trade. Malena falters and prepares to explain her motives. Malena reveals she is the first daughter of Lady Veliaka, a concubine of Lord Kasakakasha, and confirms that concubines are effectively second wives. She explains her mother was brought for political reasons, then used and abandoned, leaving them powerless and pushed to the margins. She admits that she and her mother exist as family only in name and are treated like servants. Malena confesses she volunteered for the trade herself to change that fate, and Ketal registers surprise that she chose to act despite the risk. Malena insists someone must set an example to change their standing. Ketal replies that she is clever and ambitious, calling her greedy in a measured way, and the blunt observation leaves her momentarily taken aback. Before she can answer, Ketal announces they have arrived, and the escorts stare ahead in surprise as the terrain changes and something unexpected appears beyond the snowfield. The caravan crosses the boundary, and green grass appears beyond the ice, a sudden, vivid vista. A trooper breathes that it is grass, and Malena thanks Ketal, acknowledging he has guided them out of the white wasteland without loss. The butler asks how they will return, and Ketal replies they will pass through the Empire, and that selling the weapons makes their return straightforward. Malena returns to their earlier exchange and asks Ketal to clarify what he meant by calling her clever and ambitious. Ketal lays out that her family was once prestigious, but now faces collapse for lack of funds, and says that even a concubine's child who takes decisive action could be the one the people follow. He asks directly if her goal is to seize control of the family, and the question leaves her stunned. Inwardly, Malena acknowledges that Ketal's raid is accurate, and she recognizes his cleverness compared to the noble she knows. She considers that his power to defeat the White Serpent without a scratch could make him an invaluable ally if she can turn him to her cause. Malena asks Ketal if, should he ever leave the Snowy Plains, he would consider coming with her to the Akasha family. He declines for now, saying he still has work to finish. She then offers a jeweled Akasha emblem as a token for future introduction and asks if he will accept it. Malena asks that if he ever seeks out the Akasha family, he present the emblem as proof, and Ketal says he will gladly accept it as a gift. The butler bows and offers formal thanks to the barbarian before the caravan drives on. Ketal offers a quiet farewell and says he will pray for another meeting someday. Malena answers indeed, and the carriage moves into the green country while Ketal turns toward the snowy boundary and the path he must still walk alone. Time passes, and a system notice appears over the landscape announcing that 5 years have elapsed in the white snowfield. The game-like prompts report that all conditions have been met, that quest 784 is completed, rewards are distributed, and that the snowy plains may be left. With the compulsion system granting exit, Ketal steps into the fantasy world he longed for. He takes his first step onto living grass, and allows a rare smile as the new world opens before him. A woman wakes with a soft murmur of confusion, the quiet breath of a new beginning. Ketal breathes in the fragrant smell of grass and notices the scent of beasts and the rush of a river, all things absent in the snowfield. He observes small wildlife and lets a satisfied smile spread, telling himself the new world is very nice. Before turning fully away, Ketal looks once at the towering ice that imprisoned him and shouts his contempt for the snowfield, declaring they should never meet again, then turns his back and strides into the green that awaits. He finds the place he dreamed of and cannot believe he reached it. Ketal thinks of dragons, elves, magic, and swords, and, despite a rough start, resolves to enjoy and savor the fantasy world itself as he begins his new life. As he walks, Ketal reflects that without the desire that drove him, he would have died in the snowfield. He senses a gathering of presences ahead, and reasons this must be a village. Excited at the prospect of seeing a civilized settlement in this world. He remembers how ignorant barbarians fail to understand simple shelter in the snow, and longs for a systematically designed human village. He wonders what a good first greeting would be, and decides whatever it is he will approach gently, and be gentlemanly about it. Ketal approaches a great old tree that guards a concealed valley, the air full of birdsong and wind, and continues down the path toward the heart of the hidden place. An elder raises his voice to welcome the gathered elves, declaring that from this day the valley will be their home. The elves cheer and move forward with eager hands to unpack and settle into their new lives. The elder calls for everyone to unpack their things, and the community responds with excited shouts. A young elf approaches him and asks a question, prompting the elder to look toward the concern the youth brings up. A young elf voices the group's worry about safety, and the elder reassures him that this is an extreme wilderness where humans cannot come. Elven families unload supplies and begin to make the valley into a living village, while they monitor the surrounding wilds. The elder explains that for thousands of years nothing has emerged from the Snowfield, and points out that the elves have taken the prudent step of erecting a barrier. He says the ancient elven technique conceals their presence and makes the place look like an ordinary forest so outsiders cannot approach. An elegant female elf stands revealed, and the elder tells the villagers that they need not fear the Snowfield monsters because they have their queen. He assures them that no matter how fearsome those beasts are, they cannot reach the queen, and the revelation steadies everyone. Ketal feels a subtle ripping sensation in the air, as if he brushed against something unseen, and wonders if he disturbed a hidden layer. He asks himself how far he still must go and presses on toward the valley's central tree, without yet knowing he has crossed a concealed boundary. Ketal's movement disturbs a small blonde elf child hidden among the roots, and she turns in alarm. He sees her and realizes an elf stands before him, the first living villager he has encountered in this sheltered valley. Ketal stares at the elegant elf, and realizes he is seeing a real elf, the race that first comes to mind when one thinks of a fantasy world. The female elf holds a small glowing orb, and he allows himself a private relief, thinking he was lucky to have survived this far. He is glad he stayed alive, but he also feels a quiet fear, because he doesn't know where he is. The hidden elf child trembles among the roots, thinking she is lost, and wondering how she ended up so far from home. The elf child flinches, and her pupils widen when the huge human steps into view. Ketal crouches slightly and says hello in a gentle voice to avoid scaring her, but his size and unfamiliar face terrify the little elf. She freezes in place and presses her back against the tree, every instinct telling her to run from a stranger. Shock overwhelms the child, and she collapses, unconscious before Ketal can do more than reach out. Birds erupt from the branches as the sudden movement disturbs the clearing. He catches her safely and kneels, supporting her head and chest, while searching the surrounding tree line for any sign of other elves, but no adult is immediately visible. Ketal looks down at the sleeping elf and admits to himself that they never had a proper conversation before she fainted. Since there is no harm in returning her to her people, he contemplates taking the child to the village to find her guardians. The decision leans toward returning her to the settlement, rather than leaving her alone in the wilds. He thinks about elf myths that paint them as gentle and hospitable, and imagines that bringing the fainted child back will earn him a welcome. Ketal cradles her carefully and decides to approach the settlement without hostility, hoping that a peaceful return will lead to kind treatment from the elves. He tests a small smile and tells himself he is looking forward to seeing how the hospitality of elves compares to the stories. As he nears the village edge, adult elves spot the human and panic. A mother screams that her child is missing and charges forward, while others shout in alarm that a human stands inside the hidden wilderness. The voices demand to know who he is and how he broke the barrier, and the sudden frenzy makes Ketal realize that his peaceful intention has triggered fear instead. An elder hears the reports and refuses to accept that a human could appear inside their protected valley, shouting that the barrier should have kept outsiders out. A scout urgently reports a crack in the barrier, and others call for the queen. Ketal raises his hands and tries to calm them, insisting he is not their enemy, but an elf steps forward with a blade and threatens to chase him to his death if he does not return the child at once. The elder announces that their hidden location has been exposed, and explains that their barrier was created using an ancient technique that should be impenetrable. Armed elves gather in response, and Ketal reads their intent correctly. They think humans came prepared to break the seal. He worries they will assume he is a kidnapper, and resolves that his priority must be to clear up the misunderstanding before violence escalates. Ketal lowers the fainted child gently to the ground and gives her space to stand on her own. She blinks, shakes off the dizziness, and follows his instruction to go back to her people. The child steadies herself, takes a tentative step toward the elves, and the immediate tension shifts as guardians reach for her. The child peeks out from the underbrush and freezes when the human reappears close by. Ketal's eyes briefly glow with a faint purple light as he moves, and the size and suddenness of his presence terrify her again. She stands motionless, rooted in place while the surrounding elves prepare to react. Elven villagers surge forward with staves and bows to retrieve their child, sweeping her up and pulling her into the protective circle of adults. Ketal raises his hands and tells them he has returned the child and that he is not their enemy, but the crowd remains agitated. One elf calls out that the hostage has been released, and the settlement trembles with worry and suspicion. The elder slams his staff down and orders a full assault, and lines of archers respond instantly. They draw arrows glowing with a faint green aura and loose them in a coordinated volley. Dozens of shafts arc through the trees, all aimed at Ketal without any attempt at negotiation. An arrow storm rains down and Ketal looks up through the falling shafts, incredulous that the elves did not accept his words. He wonders aloud if they can hear him at all, then braces for impact as the arrows continue to descend. The moment makes clear that talk alone will not calm the attackers. Ketal reflects that real elves have shown a rougher side than the myth suggested, noting that tales usually cast them as peaceful lovers of nature. That memory clashes with the current reality, where the settlement reacts with immediate violence despite his attempt to return the child. He accepts that the legends and the living people differ sharply. He thinks about why elves can appear both graceful and brutal, reminding himself that they are a species that lives by nature's rules. Where myths describe a gentle race, the truth is that nature favors survival of the fittest, and predator violence is part of that world. He concludes that their readiness to use force, while harsh, is consistent with their instincts as creatures of the wild. Arrows continue to strike the ground and trees near him with hardly a mark on his person, and the elves mutter about what kind of artifact he must be wearing. They call on each other to keep attacking, convinced there must be a limit, while Ketal stands his ground, studying them and feeling only mild annoyance at their persistence. He lifts a single hand and speaks a quiet command to calm them, then brings both hands together and releases a massive purple-tinged shockwave. The blast radiates outward, shattering the air and shaking the archers, formation into chaos as trees and ground quake under the force. The shockwave explodes outward like a sudden storm, blasting the front line of elves aside and throwing some into the air. Calls of pain and alarm rise as several are hit by the concussive force, and the blast carves a shallow crater where the arrow storm had converged, scattering debris and feathers across the clearing. Thrown from their feet and stumbling through dust, villagers scramble as one of them shouts that the barrier must be deployed. The defensive ranks fall apart under the shock front, and any coordinated stance dissolves into shouting and frantic preparations as the valley shakes with the aftereffects of the blast. From above the fading ring of displaced earth and roiling energy, the clearing looks marked by the violence of the sudden power. As dust settles, the elder stumbles to his feet and murmurs in disbelief about what just happened, trying to grasp how a single strike could have carved the ground so deeply. Ketal halts in the center of the blasted furrow and tells the elves plainly that he is not their enemy. He presses his hands together and offers a sheepish apology, admitting he failed to control his strength. The elder watches from the far rim of the gouge, taking in the damage and weighing whether this human strength is a threat or a mistake. A single flaming arrow whistles in from a distant angle, and Ketal turns to glance toward the firing line, noting that the queen must be directing the attack. The arrow slams into the earth near him with a volcanic burst of fire that throws up dirt and sparks, reinforcing how seriously the elves regard this intruder. The elder and a young villager watch the aftermath of the incendiary shot with puzzled faces, exchanging a look that asks what to do next. The air above the impact point still burns and curls, leaving the defenders uncertain whether their strike achieved anything beyond making the clearing more dangerous. A figure lands lightly on a crag above the clearing, and as she steps forward, the villagers recognize their ruler. The queen of the Leaf Clan moves with authority, bow in hand, and the villagers cry out in alarm and respect, calling her name. She surveys the chaos below and asks calmly what has happened, immediately taking command of the scene. The elder reports that a human has attacked their sanctuary, and the queen accepts the grim news with a measured reaction, acknowledging that the area is no longer safe. Icy Ketal steps through the hanging smoke and calls for a pause, asking the ruler to hear him out before more violence unfolds, attempting one more time to resolve the crisis by speech. Eyes narrowed and voice sharp, the elder can barely process that the queen's direct, powerful attack failed to kill the intruder, demanding to know how that is possible. Marsilia, bow still raised, spits that humans are truly vile for daring such a thing. Her resolve hardens, and the village braces as she prepares to escalate the response. Marsilia identifies herself as queen and draws a flaming arrow, making clear that she will enforce the sanctity of their domain. She calls the human to account and vows retribution for daring to covet elven lands, steadying her stance and channeling spirit energy into the bolt as she prepares to release a decisive strike. Ketal puzzles over why his words fail when he speaks the same tongue, wondering if deep animosity makes them ignore any plea. He remembers a hard lesson learned in the Snowfield. Sometimes force is the only language they accept. As the queen channels power into her bow, he steels himself for action, because negotiation has clearly failed. Marsilia releases the arrow and breathes spirit into its path, causing a spiraling column of blue energy to form like a lance of condensed force. The air twists around the trajectory as the attack becomes more than a projectile and transforms into a focused spirit, class technique aimed at Ketal. The arrow's energy coalesces into a dragon-shaped apparition that rushes down the column toward Ketal. Unfazed, he coils and smashes a purple aura punch into the oncoming spirit construct. The strike meets the dragon head on and a violent collision erupts, throwing light and shock outward in a brutal exchange of raw force and spirit energy. The collision produces a blinding sphere of energy that repels the queen's technique and sends a spiraling column of displaced earth and light skyward. Marsilia stumbles back, alarm visible on her face as the dispersing wave tears up the ground and forces her to reassess the target of her assault. Ketal casually shakes out his hand and murmurs that he misjudged the force. Then the residual energy slams into the forest and knocks over trees and scatters the defenders. The defensive line suffers heavy damage as the blast propagates, forcing survivors to scramble for shelter and giving the clearing a shocked silence between impacts. When the dust finally settles, Marsilia drops to one knee and braces herself against the carved earth, gathering her breath and assessing the situation. Catal admits under his breath that he should have controlled his strength better. The queen looks to him, silent, and re-evaluating whether this human's power is a danger that must be contained. Marsilia explains to those around her that the display revealed an opponent of superhuman strength, stronger than she first expected. Concerned for her people's safety, she orders an immediate evacuation and instructs villagers to leave the area while her guard handles the threat, prioritizing lives over pride. As villagers flee toward cover, Marsilia drives them onward with a sharp shout to run now. When only a few remain near the clearing, she addresses Catal directly, acknowledging his raw strength while warning that even so he will never reach whatever goal brought him here, and she braces to unleash a trump card if he does not withdraw. Catal tries one final, almost apologetic attempt at diplomacy, saying he only wanted to talk. Marsilia responds by beginning a precise summoning ritual, chanting to call forth a spirit of pure flame and ancient purity. Her hands move through the circle and flames spiral into a vortex above her as the incantation takes hold. The ritual intensifies into a roaring cyclone of flame that coalesces into a massive fireball, its horns ablaze and its body wreathed in golden red fire. The summoned beast, stable and enormous, stamps the ground and fills the clearing with an animal heat and presence that changes the balance of forces in an instant. Catal watches, momentarily awed by the summoning and comparing it to the alien horrors he met in the Snowfield, noting that those things were terrifying and mostly unpleasant to look at. The summoned bull, however, is magnificent and concrete, a beast crowned with flaming horns. He steels himself, aware that the combat just gained a dangerous new participant. Marsilia issues a direct command to the summoned spirit, ordering Fiego to annihilate the intruder. The beast grumbles that contracts are bothersome, muttering to itself about the trouble, and the queen snaps that he is noisy. The spirit then fixes its fiery gaze on Catal, preparing to carry out the order. Marsilia explains that Fiego is a powerful spirit whose horns are imbued with pure flame, and that summoning such an ancient, proud being is normally beyond her alone. With aid from another clan, she barely formed the contract, and now commands the spirit to fulfill it. Fiego studies Catal, wondering if the contract requires killing the human before him, and noting the oddity of the target's aura. The bull studies Catal's glowing eyes and strange presence, and momentarily questions whether this really is a mere human. The spirit's aggression sharpens as it sizes up the abnormal aura, and the clearing tenses again for the next clash. Fiego moves in a fever of flame, circling and testing the air as the villagers watch in awe and fear. Catal grins with childish wonder, calling the sight honest fantasy compared to the alien horrors of the Snowfield. Somewhere among the evacuees, a voice reminds the queen that a human has invaded their sanctuary, and the reality of the threat settles in for everyone present. Fiego snarls at the idea of a lowly human intruding on nature's domain, and decides in a burst of pride to reduce the interloper to ashes without a trace. The beast lunges with hooves and horns burning bright, and Catal turns his attention fully to the charging spirit as the first physical contact becomes inevitable. The flaming bull charges, with its horn leveled like a living battering ram. Catal tightens his stance and moves inside the arc, slamming a purple aura punch directly into the beast's fiery mass. The impact detonates into a colossal explosion that hurls rocks, flame, and shockwaves across the clearing and sears the canopy with its power. Shockwaves roll through the trees and shards of earth, and ember fall like rain, forcing villagers to huddle for shelter. Marsilia shields her face with an arm and peeks through the smoke, stunned by the scale of the destruction as she tries to see what the strike produced, and whether the spirit still stands. The bull's horn swipes with a blistering arc, and Catal notes that the fight being with a beast feels straightforward and almost reassuring. He slips inside the horn sweep and drives a purple, charged punch into the flame-covered flank, a direct counter that tests both strength and spirit durability in a brutal collision. A hard, unsentimental thought crosses his mind about finishing the spirit, and then he follows through with bone and force. The blow lands true, sending the bull crashing and driving a molten cross-shaped burst into the dirt beneath them. The blast marks how utterly overpowering his strike can be when he focuses it on a single target. A chain of secondary detonations rolls outward through the forest, like a series of thunderclaps, and a mushrooming shock dome lifts over the canopy where the energy concentrates. The scale of the release demonstrates that a single strike from Catal can unleash power far beyond what the villagers expected from a lone human. The final concentrated explosion rends the ground and sends a towering plume of smoke and heat skyward. Marsilia screams as the blast slams into her position, knocking her to the ground, and Catal pushes forward through flying debris and flame with his fist still raised. Fiego staggers and destabilizes under the assault, and the clearing falls into a charged silence as both sides absorb the consequences. A vast crater dominates the clearing, and Marsilia kneels, stunned and whispering, "Oh," she asks, "what happened?" and pushes herself up to look across the concentric fissures and smoke. She can only repeat, "No way," as the blast marks and ruined earth confirm the scale of the destruction. Catal walks down from the ridge through dust and splintered wood, stopping a short distance away. Marsilia lowers her head and pleads, "Please," and then forces the words out, "Show mercy to my kind. Her posture shifts from shock to supplication as she tries to protect her people. Catal states plainly, "I'm not your enemy, elf." Marsilia startles at the answer and looks up, eyes wide, then asks in disbelief, What? The single sentence changes the tenor of the moment as she begins to question what she assumed about him. After a long conversation, Marcelia slowly accepts what she has learned and bows, saying, I'm sorry, human. We judged too hastily. The apology is earnest and immediate as she admits their mistake and visibly tries to make amends for the hostile reaction. Catal reflects as Marcelia struggles with regret, and he reminds her gently that they mistook the one who brought the child as an enemy. She presses a hand to her chest and apologizes for their disrespect. He answers, "It's fine. You said you were driven here by humans, I understand." And she asks, "Are you really not one of the humans chasing us?" Catal explains, "This is my first time seeing an elf. There are no elves in the White Snowfield after all." Marcelia repeats the name White Snowfield as recognition spreads, and he adds, "That is what the outsiders called me, the Ashen Barbarian of the Snowfield." The admission lands between them and recontextualizes his presence. Marcelia presses at her pendant and says, "No way. I thought humans couldn't survive there." She leans forward and asks the logical question, "If you came from the Snowfield, then maybe other beings can come from there too." As her concern shifts to possible larger threats, Catal shrugs and says, "Who knows? At least not in this way." He explains that the Snowfield enforces laws even on powerful beings, and that, for some reason, he escaped through something called a quest, which is likely a rare exception. Marcelia exhales and replies, "Then, that's a relief." Marcelia asks softly, "By the way, is your summoned beast okay?" Keto gives a dry answer, "That bull, it was split in two," and she offers reassurance, explaining, "No need to worry. Spirits are beings of nature. When unsummoned, they simply return to the spirit realm." Ketal echoes, "Spirits?" As the concept settles in, Marcelia steps forward and says, "I have committed many unintended offenses. Is there anything you wish for? If you desire it, I will grant it." Ketal asks if someone other than elves can form a contract with a spirit, and she answers cautiously, "That seems unlikely," while weighing exceptions and the unusual nature of his case. Marcelia admits, "Of course, there are some humans who are close to nature. They can form contracts with spirits, but..." Ketal asks if it is impossible for him, and she advises, "If you truly want to make a spirit contract, try going to Elfo Sagrado," explaining it is the elves' sacred land where their god resides. Marcelia gestures to the vision of a colossal sacred tree and says, "If it is possible anywhere, it would be there." Ketal asks if a human like him can go, and she answers, "Normally no. But with my recommendation, it should be possible. I will give you the location. Keep it to yourself." Trust and secrecy follow. Marcelia explains that Elfo Sagrado is the elves' sacred land, a dream destination for those who study them. She warns that human intrusion is dangerous, and that elves do not share its location to protect something more precious than life. Her hesitation signals an exception for this moment. Marcelia conjures a small flame, crystal token, and thinks, "Even so, I want to believe in you." She tells Catal to take this with you, handing him the token as a recommendation token and a tangible link to Elfo Sagrado. He accepts the token, the secret now entrusted to him. Marcelia cautions that even with the recommendation, their god will test any entrant, saying, "Even if you get near, our god will test you." She adds, "But I am sure you will pass. I wish you well on your journey." Catal answers simply, "Thank you," as the blessing closes their exchange. Marcelia introduces herself formally. "I am the queen of the leaf tribe that turns brown with autumn, Marcelia Hasis Garcia." She asks his name, and he replies, "I am Catal, Barbarian Catal." The introduction sets the diplomatic terms between them. Catal departs the elven outpost and starts running, each step cracking the ground and sending up dust and shockwaves. He accelerates with brutal speed, carving a path through the landscape as he heads toward human lands. He dashes through dense woods in long, explosive bounds, trees flashing past and leaves scattering as he makes a straight line path. The forest thunders with the force of his passage as he maintains his course toward the border. Catal's motion arcs high over the canopy, leaving a whip-like wake across the forest as he covers immense distance in seconds. The landscape blurs beneath him as he heads for the kingdom of Gehennet border. At the Balkan territory border, the guards shout in alarm, "What is it? What's going on?" And I don't know. Something is approaching. The captain orders, "Ring the bell. Summon all the guards." The outpost throws the warning bell as they brace for an unknown approach. A deep furrow splits the tree line, and a plume of dust marks a violent arrival. Ketal emerges from the impact path and walks forward calmly toward the fortress gate, hands visible and posture non-threatening despite the destruction behind him. The guards on the wall stare at him in stunned silence, one of them stammering, "Why, you are," as recognition ripples through the ranks. Spears lower by reflex and tension tightens as they realize who stands before them. Ketal smiles and greets them. "Nice to meet you." The three guards exchange nervous looks and whisper about the loud noise, asking among themselves, "Is this guy an enemy?" as they decide whether to act. One guard studies Ketal carefully and notes the ashen hair and a scar on his chest, muttering, "The Ashen Barbarian?" Memories and rumors of the Snowfield flicker in his mind as the name settles and the outpost reevaluates the stranger. The guards level their weapons and shout, Stop! If you come any closer, we'll attack." Ketal keeps his hands visible and replies calmly, "I'd appreciate it if you calm down. I'm not your enemy." Keeping his stance open to de-escalate, a guard demands, "What do you want from us?" Ketal points to himself and then toward the city walls to indicate he wishes to visit, not to fight, and maintains distance and a relaxed stance while the defender processes the unusual request. Ketal points at the city walls and states plainly, "I'd like to visit your territory." The guards exchange confused looks at the unexpected request and hesitate as they consider protocol for admitting such a figure. Inside the outpost office, an officer asks, "You said visit, not pass through. Is that your goal?" Ketal answers, "If possible, I'd like to stay for a while. I'm not sure how long it'll be." The officer nods and asks for his name. Ketal replies, "It's Ketal." The officer asks if there is someone to verify his identity or any paperwork. Ketal says he has nothing, then produces the fragment the merchant household gave him, remembering Lady Milena Akasha, instructing him to show it to the Akasha family if asked. Ketal places the jeweled Akasha emblem on the table and asks if it can verify his claim. The officer leans in and asks, "What is it?" as he inspects the craftsmanship and its unfamiliar provenance. Ketal explains, "It's the emblem of the Akasha household. I received it from that bloodline." The officer recognizes the name and asks if the Akasha household are the merchants from the Deniang kingdom, noting their recent rise. And Ketal asks directly if the emblem will be enough to verify his identity. The officer turns the emblem over and says, "It does not seem fake, but it is hard to verify. It is not from this kingdom." He grants conditional entry. "It cannot be fully verified, but it is helpful." "Fine, you may enter, but there is a condition." Ketal asks, "A condition?" The officer states the condition plainly. The town requires proof that you are not dangerous. He explains there are 3 other individuals with uncertain identities attempting to enter, and the measure is to form a party and clear the nearby dungeon together as a supervised test. Ketal considers the requirement and decides, "A party is a condition? Easier than I thought. Fine, I'll accept it." He adds his own request. "However, after clearing the dungeon, I want you to tell me all the information from the process," making clear he expects a full report on what transpires. Ketal summarizes the logic, so those with uncertain identities are made to watch each other, and through that you can pick out suspicious ones. The officer replies, "Useful. You are quite clever." And then, surprised by his composure, asks bluntly, "Are you really a barbarian?" Ketal answers plainly, "Yes, I am a barbarian." The officer admits, "I thought barbarians were just a brute race. You are the first barbarian like this I have met." He stands and wraps up the meeting, saying they should go proceed with the verification. Elsewhere in the outpost, Alexandra Tyrannus, self-proclaimed paladin, sighs and grumbles that the law forces him into a dungeon full of dangerous, low-biting rats, calling it a sad story. He steels himself for the party assignment and prepares to join the group. Kasan Hark, the thief, jabs at the paladin. "Why are you picking a fight again, old man? Are you taking out your anger because a thief tricked you and took all your money?" Alexandro snaps back, "How dare a petty thief insult a paladin?" And the room stiffens as tempers flare. Kasan mocks, "Paladin my ass. Do paladins these days wear armor like that? A real paladin would not be here. You are just a self-proclaimed paladin, a wandering warrior." Alexandro's hand moves toward his sword as the insult pushes him toward a response. Alexandro lunges forward with sword drawn and shouts, "You!" Kasan flashes a grin and taunts, "You want to try? You think that tattered armor will protect you?" The paladin raises his shield and prepares to strike across the table as the tavern erupts around them. Their blades clash in a shower of sparks until Priestess Hayes steps between them, raising both hands and saying, Could you please stop?" The 2 fighters freeze mid, swing while she sighs and forces calm on the quarrel. Hayes sits and worries silently. "To think I have to conquer the dungeon with these people. Will this be okay?" The officer reminds the group matter of, factly, "By the way, the minimum number for the dungeon is 4, confirming the party requirement as nerves ripple through the assembled group. Hayes notes aloud that there should be 1 more person coming and steadies herself by the door as footsteps approach. The room quiets in anticipation while the others wait to see who will complete the verification party. The guard opens the door and announces, "The last one is here." Kasan mutters, "Hopefully this one is a bit more normal," as the door reveals Ketal stepping inside, his presence heavy and imposing as the room reacts to his aura. Ketal stands in the middle of the room and asks casually, "Are you all my party members?" The paladin grips his sword tighter, while Hayes and Kasan recoil at the sudden pressure of his size and presence, whispering that he is enormous, and wondering if he is truly human. Kasan mutters that the pressure from Ketal feels overwhelming and questions if he is truly human. Ketal smiles and says, "Nice to meet you." He then tells them he will let you talk among yourselves, and that he will be back in a bit before stepping away to give them space. Ketal rings the moment and begins introductions. "Well, let's start with introductions. I am Ketal, a barbarian." Kasan replies nervously, I am Kasan Hark, a thief." Alexandro clears his throat and prepares to state his claim as the room settles into the formal exchange. Alexandro gives his name, Alexandro Tyrannus. Ketal asks, "If you are a paladin, do you use divine power?" Alexandro answers, "Bubu. Well, normally yes, but I am a bit special. I cannot use it." Hayes then introduces herself. "I am a priestess of the god of lies and deceit. Priestess Hayes, servant of Calrosia." Ketal asks Hayes directly if her identity is uncertain even as a priestess, and she answers quietly, "The god I serve is Calrosia, the god of lies and deceit. It is just that my god is not exactly well regarded." Ketal nods and says, I see. A registration guard announces that everyone is ready and says they should head out. Catal, Alexandro Tyrannus, Kassan Hark, and Priestess Hayes fall into position at the doorway. The brief instruction hangs in the air as the group prepares to move toward the verification dungeon. Catal stands broad and patient, while Hayes fingers the star-shaped emblem of Calrotia at her throat. Kassan checks the grip on his dagger, and Alexandro keeps a cautious eye on Catal as they step out of the office. The team leaves with a quiet tension that follows them into the corridor. The guard declares they have arrived at the dungeon entrance. Ketel tilts his head with mild interest and murmurs an approving sound. The group comes into view of a cave mouth carved into the hillside and closes ranks at the threshold. The officer explains that the dungeon has 3 floors and warns that the monsters here are undead. Catal brightens at the word undead and steps forward, his curiosity overtaking any outward intimidation. The rest of the party tightens their formation and prepares for what lies within. Kassan starts to raise a concern and calls Ketel sir, but Ketel tells them to drop the honorifics and treat him as a comrade. Kassan forces a nervous laugh, clears his throat, and gets ready to lay out the party's approach. Kassan assigns roles with practical calm, putting Catal and the warriors on the vanguard while he scans for traps, and asks the priestess to support from the rear. Catal shrugs and accepts the setup as it is. Alexandro readies his shield, and Hayes nods in agreement. Ketel announces they will go forward, and leads the descent into the cave. The others fall into the formation they agreed on, and follow him into the dimness of the first floor. The party advances down the damp corridor with Ketel in front, Kassan just behind to scout, Hayes clasping her emblem, and Alexandro covering the rear with his shield. The first floor swallows their footsteps, and the air grows colder as they move deeper. Hayes whispers that the darkness makes it hard to see, and that she finds no obvious traps or tricks in the entry. Kassan moves his head slowly, inspecting the floor and walls for subtle signs, and then pauses as something catches his attention. Kassan signals the group to hold and points out bone fragments scattered on the ground. Catal admits he cannot see anything at first. Kassan explains that the fragments indicate an animated skeleton that will rise and attack when approached. Kassan mutters that the guard may have used the dungeon as a means to deal with outsiders, then outlines how skeletons behave as powerful monsters. He warns that even when injured or dismembered, the undead can still move, which makes them dangerous in close quarters. Catal studies the fragments with quiet interest. A pair of skeletons ignite with cold blue soul, fire, and stand up from the floor. Kassan notes that bone is tough and that dungeon magic strengthens it, increasing difficulty. He tells Hayes to ready her nun powers, assigns the shield to Alexandro, and tells Ketel to be ready for whatever comes. Kassan explains the only reliable method to fell skeletons is to aim at the cervical vertebrae, and strike repeatedly until the neck breaks, because bones are difficult to sever cleanly. Hayes acknowledges the tactic and prepares her support. Ketel remarks that Kassan is good at this, and Alexandro steadies his shield. The nearest skeleton reassembles itself with a clatter and lunges forward. Ketel steps to intercept, while the others maintain formation behind him, watching the monster's timing and movement closely. A blue-eyed skeleton swings its sword, and Alexandro lifts his shield to block the first arc, while Hayes begins a low prayer that brightens her emblem. Kassan shifts to the side, looking for a gap to exploit, and Ketel sizes up the lunge. Ketel delivers a single, controlled strike that detonates the skeleton's skull and disperses its blue energy. Bones scatter and the ribcage collapses across the stone, leaving the party staring at the immediate aftermath. Fragments rain to the floor, and Ketel lowers his arm slowly, observing how the remains twitch and move even after his strike. Alexandro and Kassan stare in shocked silence at the one-hit result, recalibrating what they thought they knew about his strength. Hayes exhales with visible relief when the skeleton finally stops moving. Ketel laughs and tells Kassan that he was right about skull destruction immobilizing the undead. Kassan forces a strained laugh and clarifies that his point was about technique rather than brute force. Kassan explains that skeleton bones are heterogeneous and very hard, and that dungeon magic fortifies them. He reiterates that even a skilled swordsman needs aura to cleave bone, and that the practical way to take them down is repeated strikes to the neck to break the cervical vertebrae. Kassan admits he misjudged how strong Ketel would be. Alexandro mutters a question about whether Ketel is really human, as the group circles the shattered remains. Motes of energy float across the cavern floor while Ketel studies the fragments, turning the new understanding over in his head. Ketel smiles and tells the group to continue, adding that they do not need to rush. Hayes and Kassan answer in quick, shaky agreement, and Alexandro keeps his shield raised as they move deeper into the dungeon. The party advances cautiously as distant clacking echoes through the passage. Ketel halts and listens carefully when something shifts ahead, and Kassan and Alexandro prepare for the next undead that might emerge from the darkness. A skeletal form drags itself into view, with tattered armor hanging from its frame. Kassan and Alexandro call out to check Ketel's readiness as the skeleton pulls itself forward, and Ketel steps out to meet the creature alone. Hayes starts, calling out skeleton as the true undead form approaches. Kassan warns that a real one is coming, and Alexandro raises his shield instinctively. Ketel speaks calmly and asks the others for a favor before he engages the monster. The three look bewildered when Ketel requests that he handle the incoming skeleton alone. He explains there are a few technical points he wants to test, and Kassan quickly grants permission, while Hayes and Alexandro hastily agree to stand ready and watch. Ketel thanks them and steps forward toward the armed skeleton. The others cluster behind at a safe distance, watching his movement with apprehension as he closes the gap to begin his controlled examination. Katal watches the skeleton reassemble and comments on how the bones rearrange themselves. The monster lunges with a blue-lit sword, and Katal adopts a precise stance, preparing to test its balance and reaction, rather than simply kill it outright. When the skeleton swings, Katal times a minimal controlled deflection to observe its balance and recovery. He taps the skull to make it wobble without pulverizing it, gathering data on how the undead readjust under force. Katal tests the creature with a taunting question about its next move and watches as the skeleton slashes again. He steps and parries sharply, redirecting the undead's momentum into the stone to see how its magic-driven inertia reacts. The skeleton thrusts and Katal catches the blue-lit blade with his bare hand, gripping the flat of the sword to feel the mana feedback. He holds the contact long enough to read the energy signature, then lets the weapon slide free without breaking it. Katal smiles and asks how the situation changes under a different impact. He clamps the descending blade between palm and forearm to test the force and durability of both the weapon and the undead's joints while restraining the strike rather than exploding it. Katal examines the faint residual energy left on his skin from the contact. The skeleton tilts its head as if confused, its eye flames dim and then flare again, and it raises its sword once more to continue probing Katal's defenses. When the skeleton spins for a back cut, Katal executes a quick flick that knocks the weapon off its course and sends it in a high arc. The skeleton twists to retrieve the blade, showing how the undead compensate with speed when their balance is tested. Katal notes with amusement that the skeleton can regrip its weapon, and when it charges, he catches its arm cleanly. He studies the joint leverage and tries to feel how much strain the bones can take before separation. Katal pivots and uses the skeleton's own momentum to throw it, testing joint separation resistance. The undead tumbles with a clatter and then scrambles back up with unnerving agility, proving that dislocation does not guarantee permanent immobilization. The skeleton accelerates through low, repeated arcs and Katal slips just out of reach by inches, measuring its top speed and the recovery window after each slash. The party watches in silence, taking mental notes as their leader probes the limits of the undead magic. Katal headbutts the skull and splits the faceplate, cracking the cranium in a blunt, definitive test. Priestess Hayes shudders and murmurs in revulsion at the brutality, while the skeleton's movements finally slow as its head sustains catastrophic damage. Alexandro and Kassan step back in stunned acknowledgement and mutter that Katal must be a real barbarian. Katal pins the struggling undead by the neck with one hand, while a faint purple aura traces his silhouette, demonstrating total control of the contest. A skull rolls and twitches with slow blue light, and Kassan watches it with concern. Katal inspects the isolated skull closely and states that a skeleton can move unless its skull is completely destroyed, demonstrating the hard requirement for total head destruction to stop an undead. Katal nudges the twitching skull with his boot. Kazan remarks that the experimentation was interesting. He then Jetri joins the party, apologizes for keeping them waiting. Kalaturn battery Galastic cool. The group regroups around him before they continue onward. Katal thanks them, and Kassan replies that they can wait for as long as he needs. The priestess and Alexandro echo their readiness, and Katal signals that he is okay, preparing to continue deeper into the dungeon. Katal turns with a grin and says they should move forward again. Hayes, Kassan, and Alexandro answer with eager agreement and fall into their assigned positions as they press onward into the next area. The passage opens, and the team slows at the threshold. Katal halts to test the footing and the ambient light while the others hold position behind him, trusting him to check the layout before they descend further. From the landing, Katal confirms they have reached the second level, and the party looks down a wide staircase where dim violet motes spiral in the shaft below. They prepare themselves to descend into the deeper chamber. On the landing, Kassan exhales and suggests taking a short break to rest. Hayes clutches her emblem and Alexandra leans on his shield, and the group settles into a brief pause while Katal considers the suggestion. Katal agrees that a little break would be sensible. Kassan brightens and thanks him profusely while the four sit on the cold stone to rest and restore energy before continuing deeper into the dungeon. During the rest, Katal sits quietly, while the others take advantage of the pause. After a moment of listening, he announces that he has a question about the dungeon, prompting the party to focus on the details he wants to clarify. Priestess Hayes reacts with surprise when Katal admits he lacks formal education. He smiles and calls it embarrassing to say, but confirms he wants to learn. The priestess immediately reassures him that wanting to learn is admirable, adding that she is not highly educated either. Katal nods appreciatively, and the small, shy exchange lightens the mood before they continue. Hayes asks what Katal wants to know as civilians and the church appear in memory of the nearby territory. Katal points out that the dungeon lies quite close to inhabited land and asks whether monsters from the dungeon cause trouble. He studies the broader implications for the town, and the party listens as the question frames their next concerns. Hayes explains that monsters from a dungeon normally do not come out into the surrounding territory. She concedes there are exceptions, and says those cases are checked and handled in advance. Kassan clears his throat, signaling he is following the explanation and preparing to add his own observations. Kassan outlines that dungeons are naturally generated and can take many forms, sometimes appearing as caves and sometimes as towers. He adds that most dungeons generate near crowded places, which makes their placement a matter of concern for nearby residents. Katal ponders the logic and considers what that means for how and why dungeons form. Hayes explains that when a dungeon appears, the territory checks its danger level so that outsiders, mercenaries, and guards can handle it. Ketal asks whether the dungeon spawns inside the territory, and Hayes answers that it spawns a distance away. The group accepts that arrangement and uses it to gauge how the authorities manage threats. Ketal assumes a dungeon will have rewards for clearing it and asks about the prize. Hayes explains that dungeons usually have a boss on the last floor, and defeating that boss yields various rewards. She suggests that for a dungeon like this one, the reward would likely be proof or valuable loot, rather than something trivial, which makes Ketal more eager to press onward. Ketal mutters that the whole thing feels like a game, and then tells the group he was talking to himself. He says he has another question, and Hayes, recovering from her surprise, stammers an invitation for him to ask. The pause tightens the group's focus as Ketal prepares a more pointed inquiry. Ketal asks directly who created the dungeon, and Hayes looks startled by the idea. She explains that dungeons are generated naturally and that no one actively creates them, yet she admits there are many strange things about this one. Ketal lists the oddities in his head, making it clear he suspects this dungeon differs from the usual. Ketal reasons that the dungeon's pattern feels too deliberate. It appears near crowded places. It seems to attract people with deceptive rewards, and it looks as if someone scouted the location first. He says those facts make it feel artificial rather than natural. Hayes balks at the suggestion and asks if he really thinks so, unsettled by the implication. Hayes admits she never considered the possibility that dungeons might be arranged and pauses to think. Kasan also confesses he never doubted the natural principle and then recalls the brutal rumors about barbarians. Ketal's earlier phrase about finding the situation amusing lingers in Kasan's mind and makes him reconsider his assumptions about the group and the dungeon. Kasan remembers stories saying barbarian attacks leave no mercy, and that such fighters can be cruel. He compares those rumors to Ketal's calm curiosity, and the memory of Ketal saying how fun this might be unsettles him. The contrast forces Kasan to question whether Ketal is like the fearsome caricature or something different. Ketal checks in with the group, asking whether they got enough rest. Hayes and Alexandro startle and stammer affirmative replies, while Kasan quickly packs up and signals readiness. The short break ends and the team prepares to move deeper into the dungeon. Ketal suggests they continue, and Kasan gives a tentative yes. The four rise and resume formation with Ketal at the front, moving cautiously down the corridor toward the next area. Each member slips back into their roles as they descend. The party advances through a narrow corridor, while Ketal keeps watch at the lead. Kasan suddenly stiffens, and the barbarian raises a hand to signal caution as he scans the floor for traps or movement. The group tightens their spacing, ready for whatever awaits ahead. A wooden treasure chest sits in the middle of the corridor, and Ketal asks what it is. Kasan explains that it is a reward chest from the labyrinth, and that it can be taken once unlocked. The mention of treasure sharpens everyone's interest, but they also consider the practicalities of opening it. Kasan says that to unlock a chest like this they would need a skilled thief with proven picking ability, and that without such expertise they should give up on the prize. Ketal turns to him and asks him to unlock it anyway, catching the thief off guard. Kasan freezes at the request and struggles internally. Ketal reminds Kasan that treasure chests are a thief's domain and asks him to take the task. Kasan smiles weakly and tries to live up to the role, but he privately recognizes a problem. He worries that he is not truly skilled enough to pick the lock despite the pressure to perform for the group. Kasan thinks that if he were truly that skilled, he would not be stuck where he is. He remembers that he is a novice thief never recognized by the Thieves Guild, and that he lacks the picking skills required. The thought of confessing his limits terrifies him, so he keeps the truth hidden while forcing himself to try. Kasan sees Ketal's eager expression and knows that telling the truth would disappoint him. The thief imagines Ketal saying a harsh line about worthless thieves, and it terrifies him, so he steels himself and begins the attempt, while Ketal watches without giving direct instruction. Kasan clears his throat, forces a confident tone, and says he will give it a shot while producing his lock-picking kit. Ketal peers at the tools with curiosity and remarks that such equipment is fascinating. The party holds its breath as the thief prepares to work under pressure. Kasan feels Ketal's gaze on him and realizes that failure could be fatal in the dungeon. He forces himself to remember the techniques he saw while following adventurers as a porter, and focuses on steadying his hands. The others maintain a tense silence while the thief works on the lock. Kasan kneels and repeats "think about it" to himself as he trembles and then steadies. He visualizes the picking motions and tells himself that his life depends on it. Ketal leans in for pressure but offers no help, while Hayes and Alexandro stand at mid-range, ready to support if needed. The lock gives, and Kasan announces that it opened, sounding relieved and a little proud. Ketal looks surprised while Hayes approaches with genuine excitement and says she always heard only skilled thieves could unlock such chests. The group relaxes for a moment, and the absence of traps or immediate danger helps them breathe easier. Ketal praises Kasan for the successful pick, and the thief inwardly wonders how he managed it, questioning whether he ever lived up to his best in the past. The moment of self-doubt shifts to practical matters when Ketal asks about the chest's value, and Kasan prepares to estimate its worth to the group. Kasan estimates that the chest contains enough value to feed an average family for a month, and says one could live comfortably for a while on its proceeds. Ketal tells him he will handle the loot. Amiten explicitly leaves the chest to Kasan. The thief responds with a nervous but eager yes and takes on the responsibility. Kasan lifts a silver goblet and examines its weight in detail, while gold coins and trinkets glitter around him. Someone calls Kasan to keep him focused on the task at hand, and he tucks the cup into his bag, finishing his quick appraisal as the party prepares to move deeper. Without warning, Kasan panics and lets out a wild shout, flailing his arms. Katal asks if he needs help, and whether he is hurt, trying to keep the situation calm. Kasan waves his hands and insists he did nothing wrong in a burst of embarrassed nerves, leaving Hayes and Alexandro confused while the comedic interlude passes. The group advances and Katal stops when he spots a large pile of bones on the floor. He points out that the remains indicate skeletons, and the team immediately takes positions behind him. Their posture shifts into combat readiness as the atmosphere grows colder and the corridor darkens. Katal studies the heads scattered on the ground and counts 4 skeletons in total. He assigns himself to handle 3 of them and asks the group to focus on the remaining one. Kasan, Hayes, and Alexandro tense up as the bones begin to stir and the undead prepare to animate. Katal's focus sharpens, and he tells Kasan he will leave the last skeleton to him. Kasan answers okay, while Alexandro affirms his readiness. Katal steps toward the 3 skeletons, and the skulls on the ground flare with blue flame as the undead prepare to attack. Bone fragments clatter and assemble into 4 full skeletons with glowing blue cores. Kasan admits finding the reassembly creepy, while the group quickly forms a defensive posture. Weapons come up, and the party prepares for a coordinated engagement against the animated bones. The skeletons fully stand, and Hayes begins a prayer that brightens her emblem, preparing a divine support spell. Alexandro tightens his grip on sword and shield while Kasan steadies his dagger. The priestess calls to everyone to synchronize, bringing a measured focus to the group's coordinated response. Hayes signals that the battle begins, and Kasan darts forward to strike at the skeleton assigned to him. He lands a precise slash while Alexandro follows with a sweeping shield and sword strike to control the space. Katal engages the other 3 skeletons off to the side, isolating them from the rest of the party. 3 skeletons rush Katal, but he casually grabs and restrains them, holding sure grips on skull and torso to prevent their attacks. He tells the others not to get in the way, and that he will deal with them. His physical dominance keeps those bones from interfering with the duel the rest of the party is conducting. A skeleton swings a blue, imbued sword at Alexandro, and the knight blocks the attack with his shield, sparks flying from the impact. Kasan seizes the opening, shifts his angle, and delivers a precise strike toward the cervical area as he was taught. The clash of mundane steel against reinforced bone continues as they test their techniques. Kasan feints to disorient his skeleton and leaps, striking with rapid successive cuts aimed at neck and joints. The skeleton staggers and its blue flame flickers, but the dungeon's reinforcement keeps it moving until its core is truly damaged. Kasan maintains the rhythm and presses the attack as his teammates support him. Hayes channels a skill she names Shadow of Deception, and a golden-orange radiance flows from her rosary and emblem, creating a veil of misdirection to aid allies. Alexandro uses the opening generated by her support to reposition and strike, while the priestess's magic helps mask their true intent from the skeleton. Alexandro times a decisive vertical cut, while the skeleton is disrupted by Hayes' veil. The sword blade slices through bone, and the skull destabilizes, fracturing the undead structure. The enemy's blue flame stutters as its core sustains damage, signaling a weakening of its animated state. A restrained skeleton shrieks as Katal crushes pressure points and the skull collapses, extinguishing its blue flame. Ketil smiles and says he never expected to witness the mechanics so directly, studying how the bones and core respond to force. His calm analysis keeps the other targets controlled, while the party handles their assigned foe. Katal remarks that the situation is rare and cracks his knuckles, signaling he is content to observe as the intruding skeletons are neutralized. He says he will take his time and enjoy watching the fight now that his held targets cannot interfere. He remains vigilant, but allows himself a moment of detached curiosity. Kasan links slashes and agile footwork to keep the skeleton off balance, aiming for weak angles around the skull and neck. Alexandro times powerful shield bashes to expose lines for finishing blows. The pair work in coordination under Hayes' support, stabilizing the engagement so they can finish the enemy together. Kasan reflects that Katal likely intended this as a test for the group and keeps his focus sharp. Hayes' deception veil creates a momentary confusion in the target skeleton, softening its reactions. The distraction helps Alexandro prepare a final strike, and the team coordinates the decisive blow. Hayes urges the group that showing weakness would mean death, and the warning steals everyone's resolve. Kasan and Alexandro launch a synchronized offense, and together they cleave through the skull, extinguishing the blue flame and collapsing the skeleton. The cooperative technique seals their success under pressure. After the final strike, the skull bounces, and the residual enchantment dissipates as the remnant magic disperses into the air. The party takes a breath to steady themselves, while Katal keeps his restrained skeletons under control to prevent any rebound. The corridor grows quiet and they prepare to move on. The fighters slump down for a short rest, breathing hard from the recent duel. Katal watches them and notes quietly that those who reach the Snowfield are usually quite strong, which matches his expectations for baseline competence. The group recovers, while he calculates their readiness for the deeper floors. A summary note explains that the third floor also contains skeletons in larger numbers. With Katal at the front clearing lanes, Kasan scouting, Alexandro holding the line, and Hayes providing support, the team advances without major trouble. Their coordinated cadence carries them steadily toward the dungeon's deepest area. The group arrives at the deepest part of the dungeon and finds a heavily armored undead sitting before a black throne lined with candles. The figure is a skeleton knight, and it stirs at their arrival. Kasan signals focus to Katal as the ambient miasma intensifies, and the party recognizes they face a dungeon boss. Hayes identifies the creature as a skeleton knight and voices surprise that such a foe appears here. Katal asks whether this opponent differs from the ones they fought so far, and the party considers the armored figure's imposing presence on the dais. The boss's longsword and shield project a commanding aura that raises the stakes. Hayes confirms that the skeleton knight is quite strong, noting that a skeleton that wields a long sword and shield is a threat beyond ordinary parties, unless a true knight stands against it. She asks what happens if they retreat. Ketal explains that if retreat becomes necessary, confirmation from the spirit realm can validate the failure, and in that case, a stronger party would be dispatched to handle the dungeon. Ketal smiles and finally breaks the silence by saying, "That's reasonable." Priestess Hayes looks unsure and calls out, "Sir Ketal?" The thief Kassan, the priestess, and Alexandro form a loose line behind him, watching the knight on the dais and waiting for what he will do next. The skeleton knight rises from its throne and descends the steps, purple mana prickling the air. Ketal watches the armored figure and murmurs, "A skeleton that maintains its own shape. This will be fun." The boss tightens its grip on the sword and sets a stance. While Priestess Hayes grips her emblem with visible worry, Alexandro shouts, "Watch out," and plants his shield as the skeleton knight sends a sweeping purple energy blade toward them. The paladin braces while Hayes raises a protective prayer, but the blast still slams into their defense, cracking stone and throwing the party backward. The shock from the knight's attack ripples through the chamber, and Alexandro groans under the strain of his shield. Hayes staggers and Kassan scrambles to steady himself, but Ketal remains back a step, calm and watching how much the boss can output. Ketal glances up and says, "Oh," as Alexandro pants, thinking that a single attack caused that much damage and admitting, it's too strong. The skeleton knight plants its feet and moves to close the distance for a decisive strike. The skeleton knight launches itself forward in a burst of purple, aiming a crushing overhead strike at Ketal. The barbarian stands relaxed, hands ready, timing his response, while the rest of the party watches in tense silence. At point blank range, the knight's weapon comes down, and Ketal answers with a single, bone-shuddering counter that breaks the attack line. The armored skeleton careens and crashes to the floor as its purple aura explodes into fragments. Kassan, Priestess Hayes, and Alexandro stare, mouths open, as the skeleton knight lies disabled at Ketal's feet. He casually dusts his hands and asks, "Is that all?" The one-hit end to the fight leaves the party stunned, and the chamber strangely quiet. With the boss defeated, the group gathers around a large ornate chest left on the dais. Ketal steps forward to inspect the reward, preparing to sort the post-boss loot with the team standing behind him. Ketal asks Kassan to handle the chest, and the thief replies hesitantly, "Why, yes." After examining the lock, Kassan admits, "That's not possible. It has a high-level locking device. It's impossible to do so with my skills." He makes it clear the chest is classified at a higher difficulty. Kassan prepares to give up, and the thief's shoulders sag, but Ketal's eyes flash, and he steps forward. Without finesse, the barbarian smashes the chest open with raw force, and Kassan screams in surprise as the lock and lid are torn apart, steam and dust venting from the wreckage. Hayes and Alexandro flinch as the chest explodes into fragments, but Ketal kneels and inspects the contents, noting the rewards are definitely higher. He tells Kassan to take care of the recovered items, and the thief answers in a rattled voice, acknowledging the task. Kassan wonders aloud why Ketal asked for help unlocking when the barbarian simply smashed it open, but the party does not linger. A bright gateway glows as the dungeon completes and the entrance dissolves, spilling daylight into the chamber. They step out into fresh air as the dungeon entrance collapses behind them, and Kassan explains, "If you clear the dungeon perfectly, it will disappear." Ketal asks about secret rooms, and Kassan admits they do exist but are rare, cannot comply. The source text contains only 2 sentence ends, "fun" and "returned," making it impossible to split into 5 panels with each ending in standard punctuation without altering wording. Please choose one. A. Allow panels to end without punctuation. B. Reduce to 2, 3 panels. Or C. Permit rewording to create additional sentence boundaries. Option requested. Please specify how you want to proceed, so I can produce the distribution exactly as you need. If you prefer, I can split into 2 panels with 20 words and 23 words respectively, both ending with punctuation, and mark the remaining panels as advertising, empty narration. Alternatively, I can modify the constraint to allow mid-sentence ends or rephrase the text to create natural breaks. Please advise which path to take, and I will provide the exact 5-panel distribution accordingly. A guard at the registration desk asks how the dungeon run went, and Ketal answers with a broad grin, "It was really satisfying." The rest of the group stands behind him as the officer records their report. The officer announces, "Then we will proceed with the entry procedure. Follow me one by one." Priestess Hayes quietly confirms that there were no major problems, and the team files in for the formal paperwork. In the audience hall, the guard captain asks Priestess Hayes whether it is acceptable for a barbarian to remain in the territory, and she answers hesitantly, "I think so." The captain notes that the entry probe looks for more than dungeon clearing, aiming to screen for unscrupulous entrants. Kassan says he doesn't seem like the type of person to harm anyone, and the captain adds that while the barbarian shows monstrous strength, he did not injure any civilians. The officer reports that Ketal behaves very differently from a typical barbarian, which leans the room toward provisional approval. Ketal gives credit to his companions, saying Kassan was good as a thief. Alexandro held the vanguard, and Hayes supported them with prayer. The captain notes this unusual cohesive feedback and announces, "Okay, I'll grant you permission to enter." The captain warns, even if you are granted permission, you may be deported if you cause trouble. Be careful. He then hands them a pouch for the dungeon reward, telling them to split it among themselves, and Ketal accepts with a simple, "Thank you." Ketal lifts the pouch and says, "All right, let's divide this up fairly." The others protest politely, but he insists, "But we are one party, aren't we?" Rewards must be shared fairly. Don't refuse. Reluctantly, they accept the fair split. Ketchel suggests a drink to relax and asks the thief to find a nearby bar, and the group laughs outwardly while thinking, please just let us go. Their nervous politeness shows how uneasy they remain around his strength. As the party moves into town, the captain watches Ketal with growing concern, recalling that a barbarian just defeated a skeleton knight in one blow. He thinks the man must be at least knight, level or higher, and labels him a legendary barbarian, a foreign entity to be monitored. The captain tells his men, I'm going to visit the Lord for a moment, so please take care of the security. The guards reply, understood, and he departs to report Ketal's entry and the barbarian's unexpected strength. Night settles over the Barkhan manor as the captain enters the Lord's study and announces himself with a formal salute. Greetings, my lord. He prepares to deliver the report about the new entrant to the territory. Lord Luke Barkhan leans forward and asks, what happened? The captain reports that the first guard leader has brought news and states plainly, a barbarian has entered our territory. The meeting shifts into assessment mode. In the grand hall, Lord Luke asks the captain whether he granted entry, and the officer replies, well, I didn't think it would be a problem. The Lord's expression tightens as he considers the implications. Luke asks for clarification. Then what is the issue? And the captain answers bluntly, he's strong enough to be a problem. The Lord presses, how strong? As concern about public order grows. The captain reports that the new arrival reportedly took down a skeleton knight in a single hit, and Luke repeats the words, a skeleton knight, as if testing their weight. The reminder that such monsters usually require trained knights sharpens the Lord's worry. Luke reflects on barbarians as simple, brute beings who rely on strength and concludes, so he's top tier. The captain agrees that it is highly likely and admits quietly that the barbarian could be even stronger, a possibility the Lord cannot ignore. Luke says a warrior of that caliber, and a barbarian at that, is by nature troubling, and he decides, let's call him here. The captain warns that summoning someone so strong is risky, but the Lord insists he wants to see the man for himself. Luke notes that he has his knights at hand and asks the captain what he thinks. The officer hesitates, then Luke states confidently that while the man may be strong, he's just a barbarian, expressing faith in his trained retinue to handle the situation. The Lord sneers at the idea of a barbarian threat, dismissing them as brutes without intelligence and boasting of the swordsmanship he learned from the great swordmaster. He concludes, with contempt, that this barbarian is useless compared to elite knights. Luke orders, call the barbarian, I'll talk to him myself. And the decision is set. The scene then shifts to a tavern table, laden with food and ale, showing where Ketal has chosen to rest before the summons arrives. At the tavern, Ketal eats heartily, while his companions sit around the table, smiling awkwardly as the server sets down a small barrel of drink. The mood is light on the surface, but their nervous glances show they remain cautious around him. Ketal leans back and says, delicious, this is a good place. I like how quiet it is too. Then offers to pay. Since I'm paying, eat as much as you want. Alexandra replies quietly, why, yes. And the others laugh while trying to appear at ease. Ketal asks the paladin what kind of divine power he uses, noting he did not see any in the raid. Alexandra admits, I'm still training, so my divine power hasn't awakened yet. Ketal turns to Hayes and asks about Calrosia, the god she serves, and whether there is a nearby temple. Hayes answers quietly that Calrosia is not exactly welcome, and explains that the goddess is associated with lies and deceit, shunned by many. Gathering courage, she asks Ketal, just how strong are you, Sir Ketal? Kassan and Alexandra brace for an answer, as Ketal chews and then honestly admits he still learning the local rank scale, saying he left the Snowfield recently. He asks, simply, how strong is a skeleton knight, as he tries to benchmark his own power. Hayes explains that to face a skeleton knight one typically needs to be at least second rate, and that a top-tier fighter could dispatch one as Ketal did. A timid tavern worker interrupts to say, excuse me, we're about to close, signaling the end of their meal. Ketal smiles and says, my apologies. Let's get going. Then asks if anyone has plans. The companions all shout in nervous unison that they are very busy, eager to end the evening and return to their rooms. Ketchel shrugs and says, I see. What a shame. Then this is goodbye. Let's meet again. The trio exchange a private, joking thought that reads like, let's never meet again, and they part ways for the night with polite smiles. In his inn-room, Ketal lies down and sighs. Sigh, nice. Noting that it is the first bed he has lain on since coming to these lands. He thinks the dungeon rewards made the stay possible and calls the comfortable room heaven compared to the Snowfield. Ketal lies awake, thinking that since waking in the Snowfield, it took a long time to set foot in civilized lands, and he wants more experiences. He decides he wants to go on an adventure, and considers visiting the sacred lands of the elves as a future destination. As sleep comes, Ketal's thoughts drift to loftier goals, naming places like the Magic Towers and even the Royal Castle as destinations to visit. Dawnlight begins to leak through the window as he drifts off, the summons from Lord Luke still pending. Ketal wakes up to daylight and sits upright, blinking at the unfamiliar comfort of an inn bed. He rubs his mouth and listens as Captain Gehennet bows at the doorway and says, I must have woken you. My apologies. Ketal accepts the apology without hostility and remains alert, while the captain keeps a formal posture at the threshold. Ketal steps to the door and asks the guard captain what is wrong, keeping a calm stance. Gehenna swallows and forces his composure before replying that the Lord wishes to meet Ketal in person, indicating an escort to an audience with Lord Luke Barkan. Captain Gehenna clarifies that the summons comes from Lord Luke Barkan, the owner of this territory, and prepares to escort Ketal to the audience chamber. Ketal nods and answers, "Understood," then asks if he should depart immediately and says he will get dressed and leave at once. Captain Gehenna watches him go with a troubled expression and wonders aloud whether they found the right person, surprised at how easily the barbarian agreed. Ketal walks through the Barkan territory in broad daylight, taking in a bustling market and the fountain square he had missed arriving at night. He notes quietly that daytime reveals the city differently and moves on under Captain Gehenna's escort. Ketal grins and gives the captain a thumbs up, saying, "If this is a lucky fantasy, I'd welcome it any time." Gehenna stiffens, unable to hide his confusion, and continues the escort while trying to keep his composure. The captain decides to downplay the visit and speaks quietly about keeping attention low. He announces at the antechamber that they have brought the barbarian, addressing Lord Luke Barkan, who sits prepared to receive his guest. Lord Luke Barkan instructs them to let Ketal in and greets him politely, offering a hand and saying, "Nice to meet you, barbarian. I am Luke Barkan, the owner of this territory." The atmosphere is formal as the audience begins. Ketal approaches and shakes the Lord's hand, stating plainly, "I am the barbarian Ketal." Lord Luke keeps his composure and lets the handshake pass, while the knight at his side stands alert and watchful. Luke watches the unexpected courtesy as Ketal bows, and he thinks about how barbarians rarely bow and value strength above manners. The observation leaves him quietly reflective, considering what this courtesy might indicate about the guest's nature. Lord Luke remarks that Ketal seems to have learned manners and invites him to take a seat, positioning himself at the head of the table with his knight standing behind him. As the two men settle into the audience arrangement, Ketcher studies the ornate interior and notes that castles in this world resemble what he imagined from tales. He then focuses on the armored knight on guard and recognizes the disciplined figure as someone to watch closely for skill and intent. Ketal remembers playing knights as a child and smiles. Then he snaps to attention when he senses killing intent coming from the Lord's knight. The knight's posture shifts, and a clear hostile pressure settles over the arena, raising the tension. The knight's eyes narrow as he decides Ketal's display must be punished for insolence, and he channels a murderous force while readying his sword. Lord Luke breaks the silent escalation and begins formally, saying, "The reason I called you is simple, to steer the meeting toward purpose." Luke states that there are a few things he needs to verify about Ketal, and the barbarian replies with calm cooperation, asking, "What do you want to verify?" The exchange keeps the confrontation under formal terms, while the knight remains tense. When asked where he comes from, Ketal answers that he is from the coldest place in the world, a land dyed white. Lord Luke inhales and names it aloud as the White Snowfields, connecting Ketal to a legendary and dangerous region. Luke finds it hard to accept that a barbarian from legend may be sitting across from him, while Ketal offers that the Snowfields were dreadful and leaves interpretation to the Lord. Luke then shifts tactics and prepares a different, more practical question. Luke asks plainly how strong Ketal is, and the barbarian answers that the question itself is flawed because he does not know the standards of the outside world. The Lord listens as the conversation turns toward a demonstrable test, rather than abstract claims. Luke suggests a practical trial, offering a spar with his knight to measure Ketal's strength and promising generous compensation. Ketal shows curiosity and accepts the idea, prompting the knight to prepare for a controlled demonstration. Luke specifies that the spar will not be to the death, and that he trusts Ketal to keep it within reasonable limits. Ketal answers that it sounds good, and the arrangements are set, with the knight and lord ready for the demonstration. Ketal looks forward to witnessing true aura-based swordsmanship, imagining a fantasy knight wielding mystic power and aura. He prepares mentally to observe technique and structure during the upcoming spar. Luke feels the tension build as the barbarian's contained presence radiates battle eagerness, while Ketal's quiet composure leads the Lord to reflect that barbarians retain a savage nature despite manners. The knight and Luke both show signs of stress as the match is about to begin. They move the contest to the Barkan Coliseum, where Ketal and the knight stand opposite each other on the sand with the Lord watching from his elevated seat. The bell of ceremony and the empty stands emphasize this is a formal demonstration. Luke signals the start and rings the bell, and the knight addresses Ketal, saying a barbarian should consider it an honor to witness his swordsmanship. The formal prelude finishes, and the contest proper begins. Ketal replies with a measured, "I hope so too," and the knight takes offense at the casual tone. He channels a bright green aura into his blade and prepares to unleash a technique meant to demonstrate overwhelming skill. The knight releases a green aura technique that splits into multiple parallel blade paths and surges toward Ketal. The barbarian studies the incoming vectors, noting their trajectories and timing as the aura blades converge on his position. Ketal watches in surprise as the knight's sword manifests into three distinct, solid-looking blades and splits their attack paths. He questions whether the triple blades are illusion or truly physical, and prepares to test their substance. The green aura blades coalesce and strike, and Ketal questions whether the effects are mere illusion. He focuses on the impact and physicality of the blades to determine whether they are solid manifestations of aura or visual tricks. Ketal confirms that the three swords are solid, physical paths rather than illusions, as they cut through the sand and air. The knight weaves them in continuous arcs, and forces the barbarian to rely on agile movements to avoid hitting the blades directly. The knight assesses that Ketal can only dodge and increases the intensity of his aura blades, launching additional green slashes in rapid succession aimed at the barbarian's centerline to pressure him into a decisive opening. Ketal abandons pure evasion and steps inside the blade patterns, striking the flat of a projected sword with his open hand to disrupt its cohesion. He seizes the knight by the collar, lifts and throws him in a single, controlled takedown that drives the knight hard to the sand. With a single, continuous motion, Ketal throws the knight across the arena, sending armor fragments scattering and carving a furrow into the sand. The knight tumbles and loses control of his weapon, suffering a violent but non-lethal impact. Luke cries out in stunned disbelief as the knight lands, and a long trench is revealed across the arena, where Ketal's throw cut into the sand and packed ground, demonstrating catastrophic kinetic force released in one controlled move. The knight struggles to his knees amid the dust, and the Lord summarizes the outcome, noting that a first-class knight was bested with a single strike. Ketal checks that the demonstration is finished and asks simply, "Is it over?" Luke looks down at Ketal without immediate words, still processing the display, and finally responds quietly with agreement that the contest is concluded. The knight remains alive, but clearly humbled by the result. Luke assesses damage and concludes that a barbarian who could fell a first-class knight with one blow must rank at least at a superhuman level, and he worries aloud that such strength could upset the regional balance if not understood or managed carefully. Luke considers consulting one of the few titled swordmasters in the world to evaluate Ketal's nature, and an unexpected response arrives from someone nearby who asks, "Are you talking about me?" indicating the arrival of Kane to observe the situation. The door opens, and Swordmaster Kane enters unannounced, his white hair and beard framing a composed face. Luke reacts sharply to his arrival, and Kane stands with calm interest, ready to examine what transpired in the arena. Kane quips about Luke's tastes and then asks him to present something worth his attention, saying, quote, "Tell me about something I might find interesting." The panel labels him clearly as Swordmaster Kane and establishes his authority and curiosity. Luke thanks Kane for answering his sudden summons and addresses him respectfully as, "Great Swordmaster Sir Kane." Kane listens without much outward reaction as the Lord prepares to explain the events and ask for the master's assessment. The Barkan knight lies groaning on a bed in a chamber after the match, and Lord Luke enters to check on him, asking, "Are you okay?" The knight blinks awake and assures the Lord that he is alive, confirming the non-lethal nature of Ketal's restraint. The knight nervously apologizes for his defeat and promises recovery in a few days, while Swordmaster Kane rebukes him sharply, calling him a foolish disciple for losing to a barbarian of unknown repute. The disciple stammers, "Master," under the scolding. Kane inspects the knight and notes that, despite shattered armor, the body is spotless and injuries are minimal beyond torn clothing. He deduces that Ketal deliberately tempered his force to avoid killing, and concludes that the barbarian controls his strength with unusual precision, not mere brute force. Kane states plainly that Ketal ranks at least at a superhuman level and surpasses what a knight can normally handle, while still showing the consideration to avoid lethal harm. Both Lord Luke and the knight react with visible shock at this formal classification. Luke observes that while Ketal is strong, Kane replies that as a swordmaster he believes he would surpass the barbarian, and insists his expertise still matters. Kane and Luke then note an important detail, that Ketal did not employ visible aura during his display of power. Kane remarks that producing such kinetic output without aura is not possible by conventional methods, prompting Luke to revisit Ketal's claim of coming from the White Snowfield. Kane ponders the possibility of a legendary barbarian existing in that place, and considers the implications. Kane speculates that Ketal might be an anomaly, a being beyond ordinary human categories. Luke immediately rejects equating Ketal with non-human anomalies, noting Ketal's human consideration and restraint, and insisting there is a distinction between monsters and this man. Luke argues that if Ketal had been an anomaly, he would not have shown consideration to spare a living opponent, and he finds the timing troubling, asking why such a being would appear from the White Snowfield now. Kane asks if something is wrong, as Luke remains pensive about the unexpected arrival. Swordmaster Kane stops the explanation and tells Lord Luke Barkan that the rest is a story for later and not to pay attention for now. Luke accepts the temporary deferral without protest. Kane thinks aloud that His Majesty has peculiar wishes and lets the matter rest while he watches the reports from the White Snowfield. Kane asks whether the barbarian is currently in the territory, and Luke replies that the man said he would stay. The question makes Kane stand, and he decides he should confirm the situation himself by going to see the barbarian in person. Outside the municipal hall, Captain Gehenna asks Ketal what he plans to do next, while the guard keeps watch. Lord Luke Barkan places a pouch on the table as a reward for the duel, and announces that he will no longer interfere with the barbarian's actions in this territory, effectively granting him freedom to act here. Ketal admits it would be useful to have his identity verified, since entering dungeons every time he crosses a border would be troublesome. Captain Gannett explains two paths: obtain a high-ranking guarantor, or become a mercenary and earn verification through the guild. Gehenna lays out how the mercenary guild works, saying that accumulating achievements and earning the guild's recognition can validate a person's identity. He warns that low-level mercenaries often do menial errands, but that someone with Ketal's strength would normally seek a guarantor instead. Ketal repeats the word mercenary, intrigued by the possibility. Ketal hears that a mercenary is someone who takes requests to defeat monsters and handle dangerous tasks, and asks where to sign up. Captain Gehenna admits there is a guild office in town, and offers to point him to it, setting the mercenary route in motion. Ketal grins and asks the captain to guide him to the guild office, and the captain, a little flustered, agrees to take him there. The narration frames mercenaries as wanderers who solve requests across the world while noting the romantic image does not always match the reality. The narration pulls the curtain back. Mercenaries are the lowest class for those who cannot prove their identities. Even skilled mercenaries die in uncharted dungeons, and many are treated as sacrificial labor. The guild's bottom rungs are vulgar, dirty, and noisy, and the work is often brutal. Inside the mercenary guild office, two mercenaries erupt into a violent brawl, throwing punches across the main room while onlookers shout and place bets. The disorder underlines the rough, unruly character of the guild's lower ranks. The fighting continues, while patrons cheer and wager on the outcome. Behind the counter, a red-haired receptionist calls to her colleague, asking about the new recruits, trying to maintain the registry amid the chaos. Napian Salim's advertisement panel. Mercenary Guild receptionist Rosa sighs that the new batch is hopeless and lists the recent recruits: a self-styled paladin, a thief, and a priestess. She admits the priestess seems decent, but notes the social distrust that follows someone tied to an odd patron deity. Rosa mutters that no capable people are joining, and that mercenaries keep fighting every day. She daydreams briefly about a handsome prince arriving to whisk her out of the receptionist job, then returns to the reality of men who still argue in the hall. The guild door swings open, and Catal steps inside, his size and presence drawing Rosa's attention. He approaches the counter calmly, and asks whether this is the guild office, announcing himself simply and starting the formal registration process. At the counter, Rosa asks Catal his purpose for joining the guild, and he answers that he heard mercenary achievements can lead to identity verification. She confirms the requirement for many accomplishments and asks his name and age. He gives his name as Catal and admits he does not know his exact age. Rosa records Catal's registration, keeping her expectations moderate, and then slides a mercenary badge across the desk as the symbol of his new status. She warns him not to lose it, and completes his registration as an F-rank recruit. Catal fastens the badge and asks for requests immediately, eager to begin. Rosa stammers but then lists the low-rank tasks available to an F-rank recruit, preparing the simple job sheet and explaining that achievements must be built from small requests. Catal flips the F-rank request sheet and asks whether these humble tasks are really all there is. Rosa explains that starting with herb gathering and basic cleaning builds achievements that raise his rank later. Catal nods and says he will do it. Rosa points to the herb gathering item and asks if he is sure. Catal replies that these are the requests he must complete, and asks where the herbs grow. He remains calm and practical, asking only for directions so he can get started. Rosa produces a reference card illustrating the herb and tells him they can be found outside the village. Catal tucks the card away and says he will be right back, leaving the receptionist oddly flustered by how composed he is for a barbarian. Catal strides out of the guild, and the receptionists exchange a few comedic complaints as they return to work. The story transitions to the forest edge where the herbs are known to grow, and the mission truly begins. At the forest edge, Ketil compares the actual plants to the reference card and confirms these red, star-shaped herbs are used for treating wounds. He notes that they look unusual and prepares to harvest them carefully, aiming to preserve roots and leaf condition. Catal puts on a straw hat for sun protection and announces that his first mission as a mercenary can begin. He sets to work systematically, harvesting with care and treating the task as a disciplined routine rather than a chore. About an hour later, Catal returns to the assembly hall with a huge sack of herbs, much to Rosa's astonishment. Guild patrons whisper, worried he may have ruined a garden, while Catal simply asks if the haul is enough and places the plants on the counter. Rosa inspects the herbs and notes their excellent condition, saying most mercenaries rip plants carelessly. Catal admits he takes care when harvesting, and Rosa praises his work before pushing a small payment across the counter as the reward for the request. The payment is 1 silver coin, barely enough for a cheap meal, but Catal quietly values it as the first money he has earned honestly since leaving the White Snowfield. He allows himself a small, private smile, unexpectedly moved by the honest work. Catal declares the reward satisfying and asks for the next request right away, explaining that the sun is still high and he wants to work as much as possible. Rosa is baffled that he looks so happy with such a modest payment. Rosa mutters that the new mercenary is strange while the guild resumes normal business. The scene closes on her bafflement as Catal walks out ready to take the next assignment without complaint. Rosa hands Catal an F-rank checklist showing herb gathering completed and a string of cleaning tasks remaining. She admits the sequence leans heavily toward cleaning duties and asks him, nervously, to take care of the rest. Catal accepts without hesitation. Catal arrives at a local warehouse and tells the elderly owner he has come to clean the premises. The owner starts at the sight of a barbarian, but agrees. Unseen to both, a cloaked observer remains in the doorway, watching the newcomer. The warehouse owner recoils and blurts out that a barbarian has arrived, and Catal calmly asks whether the woman is the owner. She stammers yes, and the encounter begins with the expected nervousness from someone unaccustomed to his presence. Catal cleans methodically, lifting stacked crates with ease and sweeping the street despite raised dust that makes bystanders cough. He struggles slightly at first to control his strength, but adjusts and completes the tasks without major issues, treating the chores seriously. The cloaked observer is Swordmaster Kane, who watches Catal from a distance and notes that the barbarian is clearly superhuman and could demand favor anywhere by revealing power. Kane is perplexed that Catal performs trivial errands so sincerely and continues to observe. Kane continues to watch with growing confusion while Catal finishes sweeping and allows himself a small expression of contentment, saying the work feels fulfilling. The silent guardian remains unseen as the barbarian treats ordinary labor with unexpected care. Morning at the inn finds Catal waking, stretching, and preparing for the day. He rises, rubs the sleep from his eyes, and reaches for his gear pouch, ready to continue the sequence of guild requests he accepted the day before. Back at the guild counter, Rosa places a coin pouch on a tray and thanks Catal for his hard work on the first day. She presents it as his reward for completing the assigned missions, while he watches the payment with polite attention. Rosa counts out the reward, 15 silver coins, and Catal accepts them with a bright smile. He thanks her and tells her he will come again tomorrow to take more requests, leaving the receptionist a little startled by his steady cheer. Catal considers whether to begin his second day in civilization, and sets off through the streets while a sudden commotion nearby draws startled reactions from townsfolk. A reminder that life in the town carries its own disturbances. As he walks the town, Catal spots a stately public building and pauses, recognizing it as a library. The sight prompts him to approach the entrance with the intent to research and verify what he learned so far. Ketrda enters the library and rings the bell. The librarian looks up to welcome him but immediately recoils when she sees his imposing figure. He asks politely to read some books, which startles her, and she composes herself before allowing him to browse. Catal moves through the reading room, selects several tomes, and settles at a table to read. The librarian watches from behind the desk, still surprised but calm, as he quietly studies the books stacked before him. From his surveillance point, Kane senses Catal's presence in the library, and cannot quite see him, but knows the barbarian is there. He finds the image of a barbarian reading a book difficult to reconcile with his expectations, and continues to monitor from afar while Catal studies intently. Catal reads a history volume and concludes that the Empire ultimately won the war. He notes that the Empire has become powerful, and that neighboring kingdoms like Varkan now function in a vassal-like relationship to imperial authority. The record details how the Empire devoured half the human world and advanced aggressively, and Catal absorbs the geopolitical picture. He reflects on the phrase conquering the world and files the implications away as he continues his research. Shifting focus, Catal opens a compendium on non-human races and discovers that the fantastical places and peoples described in legend are real in this world. The revelation broadens his priorities beyond human affairs as he reads on. The book presents major non-human locales: the dwarven caves of Mantamia where rare ores lie, the fairy village Pisarapia, the floating celestial city La Jameria, and the elves, sanctuary Elfo Sagrado, an inaccessible sacred place that even powerful figures have failed to locate. Catal notes that he now holds the qualification to seek the elven sanctuary, and then turns pages to a darker topic, the abyss. The compendium describes abysses as places closed to human access, filled with anomalies and twisted entities, and lists 5 especially large abyssal regions. The text catalogs the 5 great abysses by name and nature: the silent forest that colors all things tranquil, the bottomless pit that drags the world into evil, the deep sea where strange primates dwell, and the deep hole where nothing exists, among other hostile zones. Catal studies their taxonomy and prepares for the scale of the world beyond human borders. The compendium confirms the White Snowfield counts as one of the abysses, and that terrible anomalies live inside those voids but cannot cross into the human realm. Catal stares at the passage, then looks up from the book and wonders aloud how large the world must be. He reflects that even the White Snowfield was enormous, and that there must be multiple such places beyond human borders. Catal brings the last stack of documents to the Balkan library desk and lays them down. He thanks the librarian for the research, saying he has learned enough from the material. The librarian blushes and bows nervously as she answers that this is all they had and expresses relief at his thanks. Catal steps out into daylight and heads straight for the mercenary guild. He asks Rosa what missions are available today. Rosa startles at his early arrival and answers that he is here, then begins preparing the request forms to show him. Rosa gives Catal the request slip, and he takes it with a bright smile, happy to have more work. Behind a doorway, the hooded man watches and frowns, thinking the barbarian is strange. He decides quietly that he will have to deal with the newcomer personally later. A woman suddenly wakes in bed, blinking in surprise and asking what is happening. The rest of the page contains non-story promotional material that is not part of the narrative. Catal walks the sleeping streets under a pale moon, feeling the coins jingle at his waist. He notes that he completed over a dozen requests today, and that even trivial jobs add up, which makes the work rewarding as he keeps pushing toward recognition as a mercenary. Catal continues down the empty street, hiking his pack and humming to himself. A hooded figure hides in a doorway and follows his movement with intent. Catal senses a presence somewhere nearby and alters his route without breaking stride. The cloaked follower steps out into the street, and Catal stops, calling out that someone has been trailing him all day and asking what their business is. The hooded man freezes in surprise at being noticed and does not answer immediately. The cloaked man thinks that he had concealed his presence with materialized aura, and that detection should be impossible. Catal narrows his eyes and assumes the intruder might be a thief, shifting into a guarded stance with hands loose and ready to act. The cloaked man tries to protest and wonders whether claiming the title Swordmaster would be believed, but Catal reads the silence as guilt. He sneers that even an old body would resort to theft if times are bad and says that subduing the man would make for a solid report to the guild. The hooded man decides the misunderstanding is an opportunity to test the stranger and prepares his aura discreetly. Catal relaxes outwardly and watches with a casual smile, ready to see what happens next. The hooded man decides to clash head-on to gauge strength and identity, then lunges. Catal moves with impossible speed, vanishing from the man's view and reappearing at his blind spot in an instant, leaving the attacker stunned. The hooded man materializes green energy at his feet and drives his movement to slip away from the grab, thinking his neck would have been seized otherwise. Ketil notices the shifting green glow and turns his attention to the new phenomenon. Ketil remarks that the man is pretty fast, in a dry tone. The attacker admits that he almost was caught and sets his stance as the green aura coils around his limbs, preparing for the next move. The attacker realizes that had his reflexes been a fraction slower, he would have been captured, and more troubling, he could not sense any aura from Ketil at all. Ketil smiles with clear interest at the discovery that the other man moved that fast with what seems to be an ordinary human body. The hooded man decides to release full power and surges forward with a bright green materialized aura burst. Ketil keeps his gaze steady as the two blur across the street, the clash creating a trail of disturbed air. Ketil clamps the man's forearm mid-lunge with an unshakable grip and purple eyes that burn like a quiet warning. The attacker gasps in disbelief, wondering how he could have expanded his senses and still failed to react, while Ketil's hold does not give. The attacker strains against the grip, feeling as if his arm is trapped in stone while his body is dragged, and he screams that his limbs will not obey. He realizes this is not only about senses, but about being physically overpowered, as Ketil holds him effortlessly. The attacker floods his body with materialized mana, and screams that he will release his full strength to break free. Ketil watches the sudden brightness carefully and murmurs a single observation as the light plays across his hand. The attacker detonates his aura in an explosive burst that tears at the paving and forces him to slide away to create distance. The street tiles crack under the surge, but Ketil remains calm and unfazed by the destructive display. Empty. Ketil inspects the green residue on his palm and comments that thieves these days use all sorts of techniques. The captured man pants and protests, asking why Ketil keeps calling him a thief, while the hood of his cloak trembles from the recent exertion. The attacker realizes that only those at the highest level among first class can materialize mana, and that the effect he used is that same art wrapped around his limbs. He wonders why someone capable of that would resort to theft, while Ketil still interprets the scene through the simpler lens of a petty criminal's technique. The attacker observes that materialized mana can shred steel the moment it touches it, yet Ketil does not even have a scratch. He asks what kind of body can withstand that, then reaches for his sword hilt to escalate the fight properly and test the mysterious resistance. The attacker draws an aura, laced blade and slashes with a lethal edge, but Ketil meets the line with his bare hand and grips the blade path without injury. The attacker reels back in shock as his strike is met and held in a single immovable line. The attacker strains and tries to wrench free as aura ripples along his arm, but Ketil's grip does not loosen. He staggers backward, breathing hard and preparing a last attempt, while Ketil remains steady and unshaken. Ketil's purple eyes burn brighter as he raises a hand toward the attacker in a movement that promises a finishing blow. The man expects the end, but Ketil stops short, restraining lethal force and allowing the other man to live. Ketil hoists the cloaked man by the back of his robe like a sack and carries him off the street. He remarks dryly that this is what a thief is like in a fantasy world, and walks toward the gate with the captive dangling at his side. A woman wakes in bed with a soft sound and asks what is happening. The rest of the page contains promotional material that is not part of the story. At the city gate, a guard notices Ketil, carrying a cloaked figure, and stammers at the sight, asking in disbelief what the barbarian is doing with that man in his hands. The larger middle panels are promotional material and not part of the narrative. Ketil announces that the thief has been caught while holding the hooded man up. A guard recognizes the captive's face and blurts that the man appears to be Swordmaster Cain, which produces a wave of confusion because Cain is a known figure, yet the captive hangs there in a humbling posture. The guard stammers and calls the man a thief, while Ketil suggests that handing him over would be registered as a mercenary accomplishment. Cain remains quiet and embarrassed, his cheeks flushed as he is carried along. The guard freezes in disbelief and inwardly asks what this sight could possibly mean, struggling to reconcile the famous Swordmaster's reputation with the image of him being carried like a common thief. Opening curly bracket, closing curly bracket. The guard explains that Cain is a person who reached the highest realm of superhuman strength, and that such a figure surely cannot be a common thief. Ketil listens as the guard insists that the captive is not a thief, and the guard asks whether Ketil knows the man or if he is a known criminal. At the gate, the guard kneels and offers formal greeting to the man he recognizes, calling him Swordmaster Cain, the only swordmaster in Gihent. Ketil registers the respect with a puzzled sound while the captive endures the scene in silence. Ketil insists that the man attacked him aiming for silver coins and therefore must be a thief, but the guard refuses to mistake the face and asserts that the captive is indeed the famed swordmaster. The guard raises the possibility of magical disguise as they try to explain the contradiction. Ketil suggests that a high-ranking mage who materializes power might be mistaken for a swordmaster, or that the title could be a nickname. The guard decides the matter must be reported to the Lord and moves to escort them to the manor to sort out the confusion. In the audience chamber, a guard announces the strange news, and Lord Luke reacts with outrage at the suggestion that Sir Cain was defeated. Ketil apologizes to the captive, saying he should have listened until the end, while Cain remains reserved and composed despite the humiliation. Seated opposite each other in a private room, Ketil apologizes, and Cain answers that part of the blame is his for not explaining himself. Lord Luke enters and asks for a full explanation, noting he would have expected a duel but never expected that Cain would lose, which deepens the awkward gravity of the situation. Advertising. Lord Luke sums up the implication bluntly. In short, the barbarian demonstrated strength greater than a swordmaster. The observation ripples through the chamber as everyone begins to reassess the regional threat posed by Ketal's unexpected power. The Lord qualifies his judgment by noting that mastery comes in levels, and that Cain only recently attained the Swordmaster title and likely represents the lower tier among superhumans. Still, he is a swordmaster and dangerous, and the Lord decides to step aside for a private conversation between Ketal and Cain so they can clarify the matter. In private, the two sit across from each other at a small table, the mood heavy. Cain murmurs that the whole affair is too humiliating for him, and both prepare to debrief the encounter calmly and explain what actually happened. Cain admits that the defeat was complete, and it shredded his pride in a way he finds difficult to put into words. He clears his throat, introduces himself formally as Cain the Swordmaster, and explains that once one reaches that realm, human titles lose ordinary meaning, which prompts Ketal to joke about the name before they continue. Ketal asks whether the technique he saw earlier was a Swordmaster method. Cain raises his hand, and a green energy manifests around his palm, giving a clear demonstration as Ketal leans forward to watch the materialized power with keen interest. Ketal recognizes the same effect from their clash and expresses realization. Cain names the force the embodiment of mystery, and adds that people commonly call it aura. Then he demonstrates a controlled manifestation at small scale, while Ketal repeats the term as he tries to map it to what he already knows. Ketal pieces together the earlier moments and asks if that green force was what he saw in the fight. Cain answers that to use it one must learn to control and manifest mystery, and he gathers a pool of the green energy in his palm as a practical demonstration to show how it responds to focused will. Ketal asks whether mystery and mana are the same, and Cain lays out the taxonomy. Mystery is the fundamental energy of the mystic. When it is handled as aura, it forms the basis of swordsmanship, and when it is channeled as mana, it becomes the tool of mages. Both disciplines manipulate the same source but express it differently. Ketal stands and asks Cain directly to teach him the technique, admitting he lacks formal knowledge. Cain is taken aback by the request, but, flustered and moved by the sincerity, agrees to instruct the barbarian, despite the recent humiliation he suffered. Cain asks what reason Ketal has to request instruction. Ketal answers plainly that he has been wielding mystery without theory and wants proper training, admitting he knows nothing about the finer points of mystic energy or swordsmanship. Cain is surprised to hear that Ketal managed to surpass him in practice, while lacking formal knowledge. Cain affirms that he is indeed a swordmaster, and notes that he did not draw his sword during their clash, so he could not display his full strength. He decides to teach the barbarian properly to demonstrate the greatness of swordsmanship, and to recover his shattered pride, and then he formally accepts the role of instructor. Ketal notes that it seemed strange. Cain carried the title Swordmaster given his weak strength, because he could not use a sword. Cain stammers that this is precisely the case while fury flashes across his face. The barbarian studies the answer and accepts the new context, as Cain tries to hide his bruised pride. Ketal tells Cain that if he had used a sword he might have won, and says he looks forward to seeing it. Cain wonders if a sword would be enough, and worries his pride may only be partially recovered. He imagines the training as a chance to prove the greatness of swordsmanship and to recover what he lost. Ketal reflects that before regression he had learned ordinary swordsmanship, but this is real fantasy swordsmanship that wields mystic aura. He realizes the art he faces is a bizarre form of swordsmanship that repeatedly turns aura into tangible, attacking forms and resolves to learn the true technique under Cain. Cain draws his sword and explains that the core of his swordsmanship is the materialization of strength and intent. He asks Ketal what he saw when fighting his disciple. Ketal answers that the sword strokes split into 3, and that each of those projections were real attacks, which Cain confirms as the materialization he meant. Cain tells Ketal that swordsmanship depends more on technique than raw strength, and that true mastery combines the sword and aura to wield mysticism. He explains that those who reach the end of that path are called swordmasters, and demonstrates by coating his blade with a green aura while Ketal takes in the sight. Cain admits calling the effect materialization of illusion and reality may sound odd and decides to show Ketal directly. He performs a broad aura slash that slices the training hall and leaves a deep gouge, proving that the materialized aura can behave like a real, physical attack. Cain escalates his demonstration by projecting multiple parallel blade forms from a single vertical cut. The sword strokes split into 5 distinct, tangible blades that gouge the floor and blast debris outward, showing a higher stage of materialization beyond illusion. Cain explains there are many ways to make illusions with aura, but materializing them as real bodies is a unique skill tied to his swordsman path. He calls the technique mysterious, and asks Ketal what he thinks, prompting the barbarian to say he believes he can replicate the effect. Cain recoils at Ketal's confidence, and thinks that mastery took a lifetime of talent and backbreaking effort. The barbarian grabs a practice weapon, and says it will be faster to show rather than explain, preparing to attempt materialization after a single viewing. Ketal shoulders a heavy iron axe and plants his feet before launching into rapid rotational swings that carve multiple curved wind trails through the air. He uses raw speed and strength to create overlapping arcs while Cain watches the trajectories and timing in silence. Cain blinks and repeats the phrase sword strokes, as he watches the axe arcs overlap like multiple blades. He tells Ketal that those are not sword techniques but fast, brute strength swings, and begins to study the pattern and timing to understand how the motion created the illusion of multiple attacks. Ketal channels the force of his strike through the axe and sends a long, compressed wave of power that craters the floor and detonates at range. The hall shudders as debris flies along a straight line, and Kane flinches at the explosive aftermath, shocked by the result. Ketil asks Kane his opinion, smiling despite the ruined floor. Kane admits the motion looked like a materialization of illusion in reality, because speed and power made the arcs seem real, and he confesses he nearly fell for it. He stresses there is no refined technique in what Ketil did, only swinging, though the end result can appear similar to true swordsmanship in combat. Ketil argues that if there is no big difference in the result, then the method should suffice. Kane concedes that the point is not wrong, but admits his pride is hurt. He draws his sword to respond, determined to demonstrate the true meaning of materialization. Kane explodes into motion and releases green aura that splits into overlapping afterimages of his body, each holding an attack stance. Ketil watches the sudden multiplication of presences and recognizes that the swordsman has created multiple bodies through controlled aura. The swordsman accelerates along the hall and slashes with concentrated green aura that detonates the ground layers beneath each arc. Dust and rocks surge outward as the materialized separations cut through the floor, demonstrating how precise aura control can split and shape reality. When the dust settles, Kane stands breathing hard and explains that the display was the separation of the body by pushing aura to its limit. He asks Ketil if he can replicate that precise control, leaving the barbarian to weigh timing and spacing in the ruined hall. Ketil shifts his footing, tightens his grip, and positions the axe one-handed to test shoulder rotation and footwork. He counts the timing of his body and prepares to mimic the materialization effect, through raw speed rather than emitting aura. Ketil whirls the axe at full speed, and dozens of purple, edged afterimages spiral outward, creating a dense ring of phantom slashes. The convergence of paths forms a towering spiral that even startles Kane as the air roils with the axe's momentum. The spinning afterimages coalesce into a towering purple whirlwind that bores into the stone and polishes a dark vortex into the floor. Ketil relaxes his grip and asks Kane what he thinks, while the swordsman stands stunned at the dramatic outcome. Kane drops to his knees and trembles, muttering that his swordsmanship built over a lifetime is being challenged. Ketil remains calm in the huge crater they created, and the old man struggles to reconcile years of dedicated craft with what he just witnessed. Kane covers his face and whispers that the result seems impossible. Ketil studies him and responds that Kane's mind is weaker than he thought, noting how shaken the swordsman appears after seeing such raw physical mastery. Ketil approaches and tells Kane his swordsmanship is amazing while admitting he just swung an axe quickly with no refined technique. The barbarian acknowledges the difference, and Kane bitterly admits he cannot possibly reach the true meaning of mystery in the way the technique requires. Kane gathers himself, declaring that the value of his swordsmanship is not low and insisting that materializing illusion and reality is a technique only he can perform in this world. He summons green aura around his stance to prove the claim. Kane erupts, calling the barbarian the crazy one for moving so fast without aura that afterimages became real. He then forces himself to calm down and asks if Ketil can teach him the true meaning of the technique, finally admitting he got a little emotional and apologizing. Kane explains that to use the true meaning of technique, one must know how to handle aura, and that handling aura requires first realizing the mystery. He says no mage, swordsman, or witch reaches the highest level without realizing mystery, and hints that belief in gods is a different matter reserved for divine miracles. Ketil asks whether divine power is separate, and Kane answers that miracles are granted directly by the gods and have little to do with ordinary abilities. He defines mystery as the innate mystical power an individual possesses and urges Ketil to understand its nature. Kane says how one wields mystery determines everything, from handling aura to gaining mana and controlling spirits. He states that to gain the power of fantasy, the first step is to understand mystery, and announces that there are 5 stages, with the most basic being detection and sensing of mystery. Ketil asks whether anyone can sense mystery. Kane replies that only those with talent can detect it, and that those people are called third-rate. He explains that the ability to handle mystery is graded into 5 levels, and that third-rate is the first of these classifications. Kane lists the common classifications as third-rate, second-rate, first-rate, superhuman, and hero, and cautions that the gaps between each level are vast and not perfectly distinct. Ketil says he understands, and Kane announces that they will begin the training. Kane states that the first stage of mystery is detection and prepares Ketil for sensory training that will awaken his perception to subtle presences. Kane instructs Ketil to awaken a perception he has never accessed, to open his senses fully and feel the breeze on his skin, the ground under his feet, detect every shift in the air, and sense distinct presences moving through space. Ketil sits cross-legged and regulates his breathing as instructed. After meditating, Ketil opens his eyes and reports that he does not feel anything. Kane stiffens in surprise and asks whether the barbarian really senses nothing, while Ketil remains composed despite the swordsman's expectation. Kane considers that those with strength beyond mana often sense mystery better and wonders if Ketil is an exception. He asks whether the barbarian is an odd one even among the white Snowfield, and Ketil replies that he does not know because no one around him has ever sensed mystery. Kane tells Ketil it is not easy to feel mystery on the first try, and says he will try channeling energy directly to help open the path. Ketil asks whether Kane is transferring aura, and the swordsman answers that it is something like that before they begin the procedure. Kane positions himself behind Ketil and tells him to relax completely and turn his senses inward. He directs mana into the barbarian and tells him to feel the flow. Kane's eyes narrow as he senses resistance and inwardly reacts to the unusual feeling coming from Ketil's body. Cain presses and feels the barbarian's musculature and is stunned by how dense it seems, thinking it resembles solid stone and wondering how compact the muscles are. He questions whether the body is even human, and Ketal calls Cain's name to bring him back to the present. Cain apologizes for getting distracted and resumes the channeling, explaining that the key is to awaken the dormant mystery inside the body to find the path. He notes that normally the process is straightforward and then pauses with a frown as something does not go as expected. Cain slows his output and asks what is happening, as he cannot find the mystery path within Ketal's body. He examines posture and contact points closely and begins to speak more cautiously about the absence of a detectable path. Cain admits with a strained voice that he cannot reach the mystery. He visualizes the aura flowing into a bottomless void with no feedback and realizes that no matter how far the aura flows, it touches nothing and senses nothing within Ketal. Cain imagines the sensation as if swimming blind in a bottomless abyss or being crushed under pressure in a void, and then he pulls his hand back and states plainly that the channeling is not working. He looks troubled by the lack of any internal path. Ketal snaps that he thought someone as strong would sense mystery easily and asks if Cain is saying he lacks the talent. Cain answers no and warns that simply flowing aura into Ketal's body will not work, and he begins to explain what must be done to grasp mystery. Cain says that the student must find the path within and awaken the slumbering force at the core. Ketal says he understands the idea, but Cain then reveals that he could not find a mystery path within the barbarian, which causes Ketal to react in surprise. Ketal asks whether Cain could at least confirm the mystery in him. Cain answers that he could not confirm anything, and says he could not even verify whether a path exists, adding that Ketal's body is different in a way that prevents detection. Cain explains that the aura must reach deep into the core to find the mystery path, but Ketal's body is too dense, and the aura did not reach his core. He admits this is a first and wonders if sheer physicality is blocking the flow, and when Ketal asks whether he can obtain mystery, Cain answers that he would not say that it is impossible. Cain concedes that he could not confirm whether the mystery path exists in Ketal, and recommends consulting other swordmasters more skilled with aura, or visiting the magic tower for further analysis. Ketal accepts the advice and notes there is still a possibility, which for now is enough to keep going. Ketal straps the axe and tells Cain he has learned a lot from the session, and thanks him for the instruction. Cain falls silent, and recalls how every barbarian he had met before was uncontrollable, living by pillage and craving alcohol and violence, which explains why they were shunned. He notes Ketal's restraint and gratitude as something that sets him apart. Swordmaster Cain studies Ketal and decides this one is different. He asks if Ketal has ever considered settling in the kingdom and pledging loyalty to receive an official rank. The older man offers sponsorship and a place in the realm as a way to channel the barbarian's strength into order. Ketal listens without answering, sizing the offer against his freedom. Cain says Ketal could earn a great position with his strength, and that he would even sponsor him personally. The offer tempts the swordmaster, but Ketal refuses, saying he has no intention of being bound by anything. Cain pictures the possibility of using Ketal as a royal asset to break free from the Empire's rule, and he watches the barbarian leave with a silent, troubled thought. Cain presses that noble status and prestige are within reach, and asks if that prospect is appealing. Ketal smirks, and replies that he lives for his own amusement and will not be shackled by titles. The blunt declaration makes Cain tense, as he realizes the barbarian's motives are wholly his own. Cain stammers an embarrassed acknowledgement of Ketal's answer. The barbarian thanks him for the instruction and vows not to forget the favor, offering a cordial gesture before turning to go. Cain studies the departing figure in silence, trying to read what sort of man would refuse power so casually. Cain walks the castle corridors alone beneath torchlight and reconsiders his earlier recruitment idea. He admits to himself that it was a foolish thought to assume he could control a barbarian like Kate, and the emptiness of the hall amplifies his doubt as he steps on. Cain reflects that for a moment he thought he might be able to control Ketal, but concludes that is impossible. He notes the barbarian acts on his own will, may play along on the surface but follows only his own thoughts deep down. Cain cannot read his intentions and calls him more troublesome than the others, a creature like one from the abyss, and a barbarian from the white snowfield. Cain meets Lord Luke Barkin in the audience room and asks what the Emperor is thinking by aiming to conquer the abyss. Lord Luke replies that His Majesty truly wants to conquer the abyss, and both men exchange worried looks as they consider the dangerous scope of that ambition. In council, Cain argues that the scouting missions are only getting people killed needlessly and presses the point. Lord Luke asks if he is serious and listens as Cain insists. The Lord wonders if the Emperor thinks himself a reincarnated hero but puts the matter aside for now, noting other priorities like unifying the human lands. Luke warns that the day when the Empire calls must be expected and that they should be prepared. Cain agrees that the territory is imperial and they could be summoned at any time. He thanks the Lord and walks out thinking the world is already a mess and that the Emperor's obsession will only make things worse. Luke asks if the rumors are true, and Cain confirms that more and more demon sightings are being reported. The implication terrifies the Lord. He hardens as he thinks about what those reports could mean for the realm and for their plans. Cain continues that dungeon breakouts are spiking and that whispers say the abyss's corruption is leaking out. He warns that something is happening beyond ordinary monsters, and whatever it is cannot be good for humanity as creatures with corrupted mana and new ferocity roam free. Luke suggests that maybe the strangest thing is already nearby, and asks Cain what he thinks. Cain admits he is not sure, but says at the very least whatever it is does not seem hostile toward them. Both men trade uneasy looks as uncertainty grows. Luke concedes that beyond the immediate threats he has no idea what to expect next. The conversation ends with both men aware that new, unfamiliar dangers may be forming beyond their current understanding. Catal walks through a Balkan town under Barkhan banners and draws wary looks from civilians. People step aside and a robed mother pulls her child close, frightened by the barbarians' clothing and exposed build. He notices their fear and moves on, observing how his appearance affects others. As he passes, a passerby startles and pulls away. Catal thinks that people are scared and alarmed because of his clothes and begins to analyze their reactions, rather than react with anger. He reasons that his beast, leather vest, while practical, is hardly civilized attire, and guesses neighbors think he is crazy and keep their distance. He decides to change that, and heads off to buy proper civilized clothes that will let him move among people without provoking alarm. Catal enters a tailor shop full of fabric and mannequins. The owner welcomes him politely, then freezes when he realizes the customer is a barbarian and tries to hide his fear behind forced courtesy as he approaches the display. Catal says he would like to buy clothes. The tailor stammers that they do not have anything in the barbarian size, but offers to make custom garments if given time. Catal accepts, and the owner nervously promises to contact him when the clothes are ready. Catal smiles and agrees to the arrangement, treating the offer casually. The tailor's imagination runs wild, picturing a furious barbarian if the clothes are poor, and he murmurs that he will call when the garments are finished, terrified at the prospect. On the way to the guild, Catal notices a small blue bead, glinting on the ground by a stall. Curious, he picks the orb up and pockets it to inspect later, unaware of the magic tied to the object. He holds the bead up and wonders if it is a gem, as light swirls inside the small sphere. The orb emits a faint luminescence, and Catal studies its curious patterns, humming thoughtfully as he turns it over in his hand. At the Balkan Mercenary Guild counter, Catal asks the receptionist, Rosa, if she knows what the bead might be, and says he found it on his way here. He places the orb on the desk for her to examine, looking for information or leads. Rosa takes the orb and examines it closely, while Catal points out that it does not look like an ordinary bead. She observes that it does not appear to be a gem, and that the smooth surface suggests someone worked on it, leaving her curious but uncertain. Rosa frowns as she studies the bead, and admits it seems valuable, despite lacking any maker's mark. The orb's glow begins to draw her attention, and she momentarily grows still, carried away by a strange entrancement that has nothing to do with ordinary curiosity. Catal notices Rosa's vacant stare, and asks if she is all right. She blinks and replies, confused, saying she does not know what he means. Catal tells her it seemed as if the bead entranced her, and then drops the subject, moving on to guild business. Rosa says the bead is hard to identify, and that she senses a strange aura from it, offering to appraise it. Catal thanks her but says he would rather figure it out himself, because that is part of the fun. He then asks what requests are available today as he turns his attention to work. Rosa hands over the request list, full of F-rank tasks such as street cleaning, sewer cleaning, weed pulling, and potato digging. Catal smiles at the humble options and takes the sheet, ready to accept a simple job while he investigates the bead. The next morning in his lodging, Catal stretches and jokes to himself about another fulfilling day ahead. He rolls the blue bead between his fingers and again wonders aloud what the object might be, planning to test it further as the day begins. Recalling how Rosa reacted, Catal asks if the bead might have a special function. A quiet voice seems to emanate from the orb calling "Come to me," and he startles at the unexpected sound, alert to the fact that the object is speaking in some way. Inside his mind, the bead projects a mental map and repeats the command "Come to me." Catal wonders if it is telling him to go to the marked place and marvels that it is even giving him a map in his head. He considers the possibility of some domination magic or guidance spelled into the orb. He sits by the window and weighs the call and the risks, asking himself quietly if he should go. The map in his head persists like a lure, and despite his caution, he decides to follow the strange direction the orb provides. At night, he follows the mental map through a forest, muttering that he is going, and the orb can be quiet. He picks his way along the narrow path, the bead's voice still repeating the command as he inches deeper into the remote territory. Catal comes to a glowing cave entrance and asks if this is the place the bead led him to. He steps forward tentatively, senses sharpening as pale blue light spills from the hollow and something watches from within the dark. He calls into the cavern, asking where the thing that called him is. A voice answers, declaring another sacrificial lamb has arrived, and sneering that this time the offering is a stupid barbarian whose size makes him useful. Blue chains of energy coil and a ritual glow rises from the ground. A hooded skeletal figure appears clutching a blue crystalline vessel, the phylactery, and a jeweled staff that radiates necromantic power. The figure announces that the time has come, and the ritual energy in the chamber hums as the scheme to resurrect grows nearer. In a ritual hall etched with a purple magic circle, the lich chants, while the phylactery levitates at the center. The voice intones that the time draws near for the resurrection as the necromancer channels power into the vessel, and the chamber fills with corrupt light. A history panel explains that a once world-conquering evil mage manipulated monarchs and stirred wars until heroes subdued him. Before capture, he transposed his soul into a life vessel and became a lich, an immortal entity whose existence depends on the phylactery remaining intact. Exposition continues. The lich settled near this territory and scattered enchanting orbs to collect victims necessary for a grand resurrection ritual. By gathering many lives and fashioning a core of mana, he plans to use the phylactery to regain enough power to conquer again, inching steadily toward success. The Lich wonders aloud why a barbarian has been drawn this far into the remote territory he chose to avoid attention. He studies Kital's image projected at his phylactery and judges by the barbarian's size that he would make a fine sacrifice for the ritual. The Lich narrates that the orb is imbued with a special effect, designed to deceive those who cannot sense mystery, so victims guided through it cannot perceive the trap. He underestimates Kital, assuming the barbarian lacks mystery and will be easy to use in the ritual, and issues the call of come. Within the underground sanctuary, the Lich holds the blue life vessel and declares that the barbarian should become the foundation of his great resurrection. Snow, like ash, stirs as Kital steps forward and asks aloud if this place is the site the orb pointed to. Kital pushes open a massive wooden gate and steps into the sanctum, his footsteps echoing across purple, lit stone. The Lich turns at the intrusion, lifts his staff and prepares a spell, drawing a cold, calculating gaze toward the barbarian in the doorway. At the central dais, the Lich stands robed and imposing, staff and chest gem glittering with sickly blue light. Kital registers the target and asks what it is, recognizing a Lich for what it is, a boss, class undead mage who controls the chamber with terrifying power. Kital states plainly that it is really a Lich, a villain the stories speak of. The Lich is surprised and asks if the barbarian is not deceived by the orb. Kital pieces together the scheme and says that this is how the orbs brought people here, exposing the lure for what it is. Kartos probes Kital with his staff, and reports that he cannot sense any mystery from the man, concluding that he is merely an ordinary barbarian. He suggests the possibility of a mind protection artifact so powerful it can't be sensed, and Kital replies that there is no such thing, denying the Lich's assumption. The Lich activates the phylactery and channels necromantic blue energy through his staff. He tells Kital that if he had quietly allowed himself to be deceived, he could have been taken without pain, but since he did not, the Lich will crush him by force. Skeletal warriors animate at the command and arm themselves to advance. A skeletal soldier lunges with a raised weapon, and Kital sizes up the attack. He recognizes the pattern of an evil Lich hiding in a ritual complex, and says he has a rough idea of what is going on. He braces to test the undead's strength and control range. Kital intercepts the skeleton's strike and crushes its skull with a single brutal blow, sending bones scattering across the stone floor. The Lich shows a flash of surprise as the barbarian notes that the undead are weaker than expected, and continues to engage the animated skeletons. Kartos snarls that he will cut Kital apart and tests the barbarian's limits by ordering the skeletons to cut him piece by piece, insisting he only needs the man alive. The undead attack in coordinated formation under the Lich's control, but Kital maneuvers through the strikes, smashing bones without showing aura and watching how far the necromancer's influence reaches. Kital grips his fist and moves like a living weapon, blurring through the skeletal mob and pulverizing another skull, mid-swing. The impact shockwaves split ribs and crack floor tiles as he clears space, demonstrating decisive combat superiority, while the Lich clenches a fist and prepares a stronger summoning or spell. Kital drives a crushing counterpunch through the lunging skeleton, and its skull explodes into shards of bone that slam against the wall. Weapons fall from empty hands as the surrounding undead stagger back. Kartos tightens his grip on the staff and pours more mana into the chamber. Bones rattle across the stone floor as Kital stands unbowed among the wreckage. He remarks, as expected, and then declares, as Kassan said, if the head disappears, it dies. Kartos startles at the confirmation and accelerates his summoning, eyes narrowing on the life vessel. Kital studies the remains and wonders aloud about a Lich, summoning only skeletons rather than Death Knights. Kartos fixes the jeweled disc on his staff, breathes out a low threat. I won't let you off anymore, and raises the focus to begin a higher grade conjuration. The jeweled disc flares and Kartos intones, rise, as blue fire traces through bone. Armor pieces rebuild into an armored skeleton knight that stands framed in cold light. Kital blinks at the sight and mouths, a skeleton knight? The horned skeleton knight strides forward in full plate, and Kital notes he never expected to see one here, mentally comparing its stats to the Balkan dungeon variant. Kartos points and orders, kill it, and the knight surges toward them as mana pressure swells. The skeleton knight dives in with its sword aimed at Kital, and the barbarian squares his shoulders, intrigued by the construct's durability. He mutters that a Lich, made knight will be interesting to test, then moves to meet the charge head-on. Kital meets the blow and turns his momentum into a single devastating strike that drives the skeleton knight through armor and bone into the tiles. The floor erupts in a violet shock, splinters and fragments fly everywhere, and the construct collapses into ruin under one brutal exchange. Dust rolls across the chamber, and the scattered bones settle, but Kital rises steady and remarks that the construct was indeed more durable. Kartos narrows his eye sockets and calls up everything he has, barking the command, activate your mana to the limit, as a vast mental formation begins to form. Blue-black currents curl outward from Kartos, and a low, humming vortex envelopes the chamber. The wave thickens into a mind, targeting construct aimed at Kital, and the mana density climbs toward a dangerous threshold. The barbarian remains standing in its center, watching the flow. The domination vortex tightens into a roaring column, and skeletal fragments spiral within the field as energy vectors sweep down toward Kital. He tracks the incoming motion, feels the chamber darken under the wave, and steels himself for the impact. Recognizing the pattern, Kital slams a grounded counter into the floor that cracks concentric rings through the vortex. The spell's physical translation rebounds off his position but fails to dislodge him, and Kartos' eye lights widen in dawning disbelief. The aftershock cascades outward, and Kital shakes dust from his fist, perfectly stable and clear of cognitive impairment. Kartos stares, stunned that his mind, targeting formation produced no visible effect on the barbarian, and the caster's confidence takes a tremor. As the haze thins, Kettle steps through the fading mist and crushes a stray skull beneath his boot, as confirmation that the minion phase is over. He peers across the ruins and asks simply, "Is that it?" while scanning for further traps. Kartos pushes out with a probing vision and wonders, who are you supposed to be? He detects no mystery, no artifact aura, and concludes that this resistance must come from the barbarian's raw power alone. Recognition of an anomaly deepens his caution. Kettle registers the question with a blank look, while Kartos reels at the implication that a man could crush a skeleton knight with sheer strength. The Lich admits, "You're quite unusual," and moves to take the fight personally, summoning a fresh coil of blue smoke. Kartos rises and weaves a vast spell circle overhead, his voice cold as he tells the barbarian that he should feel honored. The floor fractures beneath Kettle and he lifts a brow, reacting to an incoming suppression that aims to pin him in place. The Lich's eyes flare in darkness as he jeers, "Are you afraid? You will regret setting foot in my sanctuary." Kettle shrugs and answers bluntly that he only came because the orb called him, and asks if Kartos was the one who scattered those orbs. The caster hesitates, uneasy. Kartos booms his full title and boasts that he is the destroyer of kingdoms, then pours himself into an even higher aria of magic. He presses the domination sequence forward while Kettle watches, slightly bemused and unsettled by the Lich's grandstanding. Images of distant names like the Elf Queen flicker through Kettle's mind as Kartos drives his ritual into a black-purple maelstrom. The Lich orders, "Become the stepping stone of my resurrection, wretched barbarian," and the spiral opens above them, threatening to pull everything in. Text boxes explain that Kartos' original spell is designed to manipulate human emotion, dredging a target's darkest thoughts and breaking them from the inside at very low mana cost. The domination field expands and presses against Kettle's position like cold water. The Lich sneers that a barbarian without mystery will fall like the rest, and muses about capturing the man for study. He snaps an order to his minions, "Drag him away!" and glowing chains and skeletons surge in to bind Kettle while the mental wave continues to press. Undead coil around Kettle's limbs with glowing threads as another skeleton lifts a blade. The restraint pattern tightens in time with the domination wave, an attempt to combine physical capture with the mental assault and force compliance. Kettle's gaze flashes purple and he surges, tearing through the binding coils and snapping skeletons apart under the strain. He launches himself straight toward Kartos, casting Vector, refusing to be dragged or broken by the mental onslaught. Kettle's landing detonates the clustered undead and shatters the floor again, a point of kinetic force that throws Kartos off balance. The Lich staggers and curses that the spell should have worked perfectly, his tactical confidence fraying as failure mounts. The barbarian remarks that the repeated skeleton trick is boring, then closes the distance and slaps through Kartos, jawline and robes, tearing the caster's concentration. The narrative notes that humans are emotional beings, which is why emotion-based magic often succeeds. Kartos' doctrine runs through the air, claiming that even elite warriors carry deep shadows and that emotion magic never fails. Kettle mocks the tactic and asks for a proper spell like a fireball. The Lich bristles and begins a climactic summoning, intoning, "Come forth!" The ritual coalesces into an intangible wave that slams into the chamber, and the sigils spin out into a map, wide mental calamity. Kartos shouts, "Drown the world in madness," as the formation gathers, and Kettle watches with widening curiosity. The Lich orders, "Be consumed," and skeletal hands of energy claw inward as the intangible wave collapses on Kettle's spot. A dark sphere snaps around the barbarian and the shell of madness attempts to encase him as Kartos strains to drive the takeover. The compression intensifies, and Kartos laughs aloud, blue fire belching from his skull sockets as he forces the spell to maximum duration. The formation tries to overwrite Kettle's psyche directly while the Lich revels in what he expects will be total victory. Kartos chokes and collapses under his own exertion, admitting that he used up almost all his mana just to sustain the spell. He forces a laugh and whispers that the barbarian must be finished, conceding with a strained thought that Kettle is not bad, as exhaustion washes over him. The sphere dissolves and Kettle stands up as if nothing happened, looking around and asking, "So is that all?" Kartos freezes, aghast that his strongest mental assault failed, and feels his entire domination arsenal called into question. Kartos flashes through scenarios where even a mighty hero's mind would shatter under the attack and gasps, "Who is this man?" Kettle answers coolly that the torrent was impressive, but he felt nothing from it, and tightens his grip on his weapon, preparing to take the initiative. Kettle gives a small, confident smile and announces that it is his turn now. He steps forward as Kartos, mana reserves run low, shifting the momentum of the fight toward the barbarian, while the caster struggles to stay upright. Kartos demands whether Kettle came here with knowledge of the Lich's identity. Kettle tilts his head, acting puzzled, then answers plainly that yes, he did. The casual confirmation deepens the Lich's paranoia about planned countermeasures. The Lich rants that the Empire must be behind Kettle's presence, mocking their speed and vowing to resurrect and break the blade that points at him. He references a rumored imperial human pen that breeds special talent and assumes the barbarian was raised for assassination. Kartos bellows his full title, declaring he will kill the supposed imperial assassin and overthrow the Empire. Kettle looks genuinely puzzled and wonders if the Lich has gone insane as Kartos prepares a last resort method with manic focus. Kartos uncorks a blue, glowing life vessel and pours a liquid stream of soul, energy into the air. The shimmering current slides across the floor toward Kettle, as the Lich initiates a possession protocol using the vessel as conduit. Kartos shouts, "Hand over your body!" and drives the soul beam straight into Ketal's chest. The beam seeks to enter the barbarian directly and devour his mind. A bypass that aims to render internal defenses irrelevant and allow the Lich to seize a living form. Within Ketal's inner world, Kartos narrates the risk that after a successful takeover, he will cease to be a Lich and must live in the barbarian's body permanently. He grins and declares, "Now this body is mine," and pours himself fully into the possession attempt. Inside the barbarian's inner world, the Lich stumbles and asks, "Is this the inner world of the barbarian?" He admits he has never seen anything like it, and feels perception alone corrode his mind, as if the place carries an alien, contaminating quality. Kartos convulses violently, and cries out that the Empire could not have made something like this. His probe into the inner domain triggers a severe backlash, and the Lich's control begins to fracture under a presence tied to Ketal's psyche. The Lich screams that his mind is about to break and abruptly collapses from within the inner world. Externally, his body crumples to the floor, as Kartos' final will seems to rupture under contact with whatever resides inside Ketal. Ketal stands through the echo of the deep dark torrent, and calls the spell somewhat cool, but nothing more. He notes that Liches are said to be the final evolved form of mages, and, curious, reaches for Kartos' equipment to see what magic it contained. Ketal retrieves the jeweled disc that pulsed during Kartos, casting and wonders aloud if the focus grants magic use. He decides that since he cleared the dungeon he should claim the reward and holds the disc up, testing the thought that it might let him use magic. Ketal slips the focus into a pocket and decides to keep the find to himself. He then spots the blue jar lying nearby, recognizes it as a life vessel by its sheen, and picks it up as additional loot and possible evidence of the Lich's methods. He plans to have receptionist Rosa appraise the vessel, then scans the chamber for anything suspicious. Ketal's eyes catch a subtle formation worked into a wall and he moves closer, carrying the disc and jar with him. Ketal presses against the carved formation and the stone trembles. A hidden section gives way and a secret room collapses open. He beams a quick, satisfied smile and says, "Bingo," preparing to step into whatever lies beyond. Ketal steps into a hidden sacrificial room and takes in the scene of motionless civilians and travelers laid out on the floor. He surveys the captive faces and the guards at the entry, and the label on the chamber confirms this is Kartos' hidden sacrificial room. The barbarian notes the number of victims and the scale of the kidnapping as he scans the nearby walls and relics for clues. Ketal freezes for a moment and realizes these people are truly here and unresponsive. He moves closer, wondering aloud where they came from and who took them as he probes the room with careful steps. He reaches out to rouse the nearest person and tries to get a reaction, but the captive remains in a deep trance or magically suppressed state. The lack of response makes him realize this will not be a simple rescue. Ketal checks several victims and finds no one waking despite his attempts. He decides a systematic rescue is required and resolves to return to the territory to raise the alarm and organize a retrieval. He pockets the jeweled focus and carries the blue life vessel with him as evidence. Before he departs, he promises himself he will explain the situation clearly so the guild and guards will handle the freed people. Ketal arrives at the Balkan Mercenary Guild and walks up to the reception desk where Rosa works. The front desk is quiet and sunlit, and the counterbell still sits where it always does. He approaches with the blue jar and the focus in hand, intent on getting them appraised and starting the process he promised. Receptionist Rosa brightens when she sees Ketal early and greets him warmly. He answers that he had some work and keeps his tone casual even though he is carrying the jar and focus. Rosa tilts her head, confused by the unexpected visit since nothing official was posted. Ketal lets the small smile hold as he prepares to lay out what he found. Ketal mentions the orb he showed Rosa the day before and hints at something larger. Rosa laughs it off at first, unable to accept the idea that a lich could be nearby, since only a handful of leeches are said to remain. She jokes about the impossibility of one hiding so close, but the notion lingers and makes her uneasy as she imagines the implications. Ketal watches her reaction and prepares to present the evidence. Ketal sets the blue jar on the counter, and it hums with an otherworldly light that immediately freezes Rosa. He tells her it looks like a lich's life vessel, and asks for an appraisal. The jar's glow and the scent of ancient magic change the room's air, and Rosa's expression turns from disbelief to alarm as she realizes this is not a simple trinket. The magnitude of the object forces her to stop smiling and pay attention. Rosa stammers that this cannot be a joke as the jar continues to emit a faint, ominous glow. Ketal adds that there were a few people inside when he found it, and that they were terrified, which only increases her alarm. She reaches out and inspects the vessel more closely, the color of her face changing as the implications settle in. The desk becomes the center of a rapidly escalating emergency. Ketal explains he left the abductees because they were too terrified to move, and came back to report the situation. Rosa recalls recent disappearances across the territory that were never resolved, and begins to suspect a pattern. The thought of a lich kidnapping people makes her blood run cold, and she agrees that this must be escalated immediately. Ketal stresses the need for the guild to send help, and to secure the life vessel as proof. Rosa scrambles to call for help, and summons the garrison as alarms begin to sound in the guild. A Balkan territory guard bursts into the hall, shouting that there might be a lich near the territory and demanding a full report. The emergency handoff from the guild to the garrison is set in motion as men rush to gather evidence and secure the area, The sense of crisis spreads quickly through the building. Catal remains calm as the guards flood the reception and offers a brief greeting to the captain who has arrived. He tells them the situation is under control as best he can, and that the victims can be accounted for. When the captain hears details, he calls out a name that makes everyone in the room tense, Kartos Bernuris Kessis, linking the incident to a legend few want to believe is real. The mention of that name changes the tone from alarm to dread. The guard captain confirms the name at once, and the staff exchange looks of disbelief that such a figure could be involved. Catal asks if the captain truly knows the name, and the captain replies that everyone in the garrison knows the tales. The name Kartos Bernuris Kessis hangs heavy in the air as a stark explanation for the strange magic they have encountered. The guards move to catalog the evidence and prepare formal reports. The captain explains that Kartos was an archmage who unleashed magic that manipulated emotions a century ago and caused kingdoms to fall into chaos. He asks if such a being could really have been present here as a lich. Catal answers bluntly that what he witnessed did not feel like the all-powerful legend, and that the lich had been acting strangely before itself, destructed. The captain reacts with disbelief, unable to reconcile the myth with Catal's understated account. The captain cannot accept that Kartos might have self-destructed, and asks Catal for more detail. Catal repeats that he reported only what he witnessed, and that there is little more to add. The captain steels himself and decides to inform Lord Luke Barkon at once, recognizing the political and military implications of a lich so close to their territory. Officers begin to coordinate the next steps as news travels upward. The captain leaves immediately to report to Lord Luke Barkon in the audience hall. Luke listens as the report reaches him and questions whether the threat is truly a lich or another kind of monster. A heavy retainer stands by in armor as the Lord weighs the credibility and danger of the claim. The possibility that a powerful undead has appeared near his lands forces him to consider broader implications. The captain relays testimonies from rescued captives and presents the Blue Life vessel as evidence. Lord Luke studies the artifact and acknowledges that a life vessel strongly suggests lich involvement. He realizes how dangerous it would be for such a being to secretly settle near the territory and begins weighing the credibility and risk of escalation. The room grows quiet as officials think through the political ripple effects. Lord Luke declares the evidence sufficient to warrant imperial attention and orders that investigators be dispatched. He notes that Swordmaster Kane is currently away and calls the situation a headache for their chain of command. He instructs his retinue to prepare messages to the kingdom and empire to coordinate investigators and reinforcements. The bureaucracy moves into action even as he contemplates the political cost. Luke admits it is a relief that the barbarian discovered the lair first, since the territory might otherwise have suffered the first casualties. The captain explains that Kartos appears to have been prepared for a resurrection, which would have made the situation far worse. Both men agree that while the timing was irregular, it remains plausible, and that the prompt intervention prevented a greater disaster. They begin to plan how to secure the site and prevent further threats. Luke decides the barbarian deserves a fitting reward for exposing the lair and saving lives. He looks out at the night and concedes the territory may lack the resources to provide a grand compensation. The political calculation extends beyond gratitude, since rewarding a single outsider could set precedents or invite envy. Still, he vows to do what he can within his means to recognize the deed. Dawn brings a new urgency as a messenger races through the estate shouting for the Lord. The morning light shows the estate waking and servants rushing to attention, indicating follow-up actions are already underway. The political machinery turns over quickly, as the news ripples out to higher authorities. The Lord braces for further developments and new visitors. Luke stands and summons his visitors into the great hall as the doors swing open. A breathless maid announces the arrival of Her Excellency Aquaz, the Sun God's heretic inquisitor, a visitor of the highest authority. The news shocks Luke, who understands the implications of the church intervening directly in territorial matters. The court quiets as everyone prepares for a high-level audience with the inquisitor. Luke reacts in stunned disbelief when he learns who has arrived, and asks why the church's inquisitor would come personally. The hall holds its breath as the presence of a Sun God official immediately elevates the matter beyond local jurisdiction. Luke tries to gather himself to answer properly as the Inquisitor's steps echo through the chamber. The Sun God's heretic Inquisitor Aquaz appears, radiating authority and holy light as she steps into the hall. The priestly regalia and the church's emblem make it clear she speaks for an institution that can override even imperial concerns. Luke greets her formally and prepares to explain the incident, fully aware that her judgment will carry great weight. The Inquisitor's presence commands immediate deference. Luke manages a formal greeting and identifies himself as the Lord of the Barkon territory. Aquaz thanks him for receiving her despite her sudden visit, and introduces herself as the Sun God's heretic inquisitor. The attendants know quietly that she is unusually young for her office, but her reputation precedes her, and the court understands her authority. The meeting begins on solemn and high-stakes terms. A sequence of images recalls Aquaz's deeds. She decapitated 7 dark mages and single-handedly stopped a large-scale ritual. Narration emphasizes that she is the most formidable heretic inquisitor of the Sun God on the continent. Even the Empire steps aside for the church when she moves, confirming that her authority and power exceed that of many territorial lords. Her reputation explains why Luke treated her visit with such gravity. Aquaz states she has come because she wishes to discuss an oracle and notes the territory's recent chaos. Luke answers that the dungeon incident was resolved but remains uneasy about the larger implications. The Inquisitor presses for context to verify whether the event relates to the church's concerns. Luke realizes her visit is not merely ceremonial and prepares to explain what happened. Before explaining the oracle, Aquaz asks Luke to recount the events in his territory, so she can confirm the facts herself. Her request makes him more tense, since any discrepancy could carry spiritual consequences. He composes himself to give an accurate report while the Inquisitor listens intently, weighing what he will say against what the church already knows. The audience becomes an interrogation by protocol. Luke hesitates, but begins to explain the barbarian's discovery and the possible lich in the dungeon. Aquaz focuses her attention and clarifies that she means the barbarian and the lich specifically. Her direct question underscores the seriousness of the matter, and signals that the church will pursue any leads that affect the balance of power or threaten the faithful. Luke gathers his account to be precise. Luke admits there is a possibility the lich in question was Kartos Brenuris Kessis, and offers the life vessel as proof. The artifact is placed before Aquaz, and its presence causes her to react with surprise and concern. She examines the vessel carefully, understanding that such an item would only be used by a lich. The physical evidence moves the discussion from rumor to a formal investigation by the church. Aquaz grips the sun medallion at her chest and studies the life vessel with a steady gaze. The visions of Kartos and the dungeon flash through her mind as she asks whether the barbarian remains in the territory. Luke confirms Catal is still here, and they both consider the implications that a new, powerful outsider might be walking among them. The Inquisitor's interest sharpens into a personal motive. Aquaz repeats the question with concern, unable to dismiss the possibility that such a being is still present. She contemplates the threat, and how a barbarian with unusual power could tie into the church's deeper concerns. Her resolve hardens as she prepares to act, and the audience senses that this visit will have consequences beyond a simple inquiry. Luke confirms Catal remains in the territory, and Aquaz expresses disbelief that a barbarian could defeat Kartos. She asks which clan he belongs to, and learns he claims to be from the White Snowfield. The Inquisitor's interest deepens at the mention of that region, and she wonders aloud how an existence from the abyss could have leaked into the outside world. She begins to suspect the barbarian may be the key reason for her visit. Luke confirms the barbarian's claim that he hails from the White Snowfield, a name that carries weight and mystery. The admission hangs in the hall like a silent charge, and everyone present registers the odd significance of that remote place. Aquaz considers how this detail might change the church's interest and the broader investigation. Aquaz connects the dots and says that if the barbarian truly came from the White Snowfield, it might explain why she was drawn here. She admits that his existence could be the actual reason for her presence, not merely the lich. Luke, startled, asks her to clarify as she prepares to request a direct meeting with the man who toppled Kartos. The inquiry shifts from fact-finding to a deliberate attempt to encounter Catal. Back at Catal's lodging, the scene shifts to a simple interior and a blue crystal that glows faintly on the table. Catal studies the gem and wonders aloud how to use the artifact for magical assistance. He considers asking the wizards later when opportunities present themselves. For now, he holds the gem and feels it thrumming with potential. Catal examines the artifact, noting that it resembles an assistive magic implement, and deciding he can ask wizards about it later. As sunlight fills the room, he feels that the time has come to move forward with the next steps of his journey. He dresses and readies himself, aware that events in the territory are unfolding quickly and that his presence will be requested. A guard arrives and informs Catal that the sun god's heretic inquisitor has requested a meeting at the church. The guard reminds him to show proper courtesy when meeting such an important official. Catal smiles and shrugs, confident that he can manage formalities despite his rough appearance. He gathers his things and prepares to be escorted to the church. The guard confirms Catal is ready, and the barbarian nods, ready to go. He sets off with the guard through the streets toward the church, resolute and quietly curious about the inquisitor who summoned him. The narrative notes that gods exist in this world, and that their agents can appear to influence mortal affairs, setting the stage for Catal's meeting. A descriptive interlude explains that gods sometimes bestow power or descend to this world, and that the church is where those who serve such gods gather. Catal and his escort arrive at the church, standing beneath towering architecture and colored glass. He takes in the grandeur with evident awe, recognizing that this is a seat of divine authority far removed from the frozen wasteland he claims as home. The church's exterior gleams in the sunlight, and Catal pauses to admire the scale and beauty of the building. The guard tells him someone will escort him inside, and Catal offers a simple thanks, feeling the weight of the occasion. The structure's aura reinforces to him that he is entering a place of power and scrutiny. Catal steps into the church and feels the solemn atmosphere immediately as his boots cross the threshold. He is struck silent for a moment by the ornate interior and the hush that fills the space. An attendant greets him politely and informs him that Lady Aquaz is waiting, and Catal follows the escort deeper into the church without hesitation. 3 nuns approach and bow as they welcome Catal into the church. One explains that Lady Aquaz awaits and offers to escort him to the Inquisitor's chambers. Catal agrees politely and follows, maintaining a respectful but relaxed demeanor. The attendants lead him through quiet corridors toward the audience chamber. Aquaz stands to receive Catal and offers a simple formal greeting, introducing herself as the sun god's heretic inquisitor. Catal answers in kind, calling himself the barbarian Catal and offering a courteous bow. He notes silently that though she appears young, her bearing marks her as a seasoned judge of heresy. Aquaz studies him carefully, measuring his presence and the truth behind his claims. Catal asks directly why the Inquisitor called him, and Aquaz begins by recounting Kartos' history. She says Kartos committed great evil in the past, destroying kingdoms with emotion, manipulating magic before eventually turning into a lich. Aquaz tells Ketal that a being of that nature appearing near the territory concerns the church, and she wants to hear his account to verify the facts. Ketal listens and prepares to explain what he witnessed. Aquaz asserts that only a hero could have stopped someone like Kartos, implying great honor for the one responsible. Ketal reports plainly that the Kartos he encountered was unstable and self-destructed rather than giving an epic battle tale. Aquaz requests that the sun god observe the conversation to help determine truth, offering a spiritual verification. Ketal agrees to the church's terms so the record will be clear. Aquaz explains that the sun god's observation works like a divine lie detector, and that a negative reaction will occur if falsehood is spoken. She gives Ketal the option to refuse if he feels uncomfortable, but he replies that he has nothing to hide. He sees this as an opportunity to experience the power of a god firsthand and welcomes the verification. Aquaz nods, acknowledging his consent. Aquaz asks again whether Ketal truly feels comfortable with divine scrutiny, and he answers with casual confidence that he has not lied. His frankness surprises her, and she watches closely for any sign of deception. The church prepares to begin the ritual that will call the sun god's attention to the truth of Ketal's testimony. Ketal stands steady, unflinching. Aquaz closes her eyes and begins the invocation, calling upon the sun god to reveal impurity. Her voice carries a formal prayer, as bright holy light gathers and the church fills with warmth. The ritual conjures a visible manifestation of divine sight over the building, signaling that the sun god is being asked to observe and judge the truth. Ketal braces as the spiritual atmosphere intensifies. A column of golden light descends and bathes the church as the invocation reaches its peak. Ketal feels the beam press against him and senses an extraordinary awareness opening in his mind. The environment hums with the presence of something immense beyond mortal description. The sun god's power probes the room, searching for impurity as the ritual demands. A presence beyond the light reveals itself as the sun god's gaze sweeps the church, an existence so vast it defies ordinary description. The divine perception folds through the room and lands on Ketal, and he senses an emotion emanating from that vastness. The feeling is enormous and difficult to name, and the narrative registers the first stirrings of a response that will determine the truth of his words. The scene ends on the brink of revelation as the divine observation takes hold. The sun god's gaze settles over Ketal, and the chamber waits for a reaction that never comes. Aquaz recognizes the absence of divine condemnation and breathes out a quiet relief. She announces that the formal questioning will begin now and prepares to move the process forward. Aquaz states that under the sun god's scrutiny, no lies will be tolerated, and that truth must stand. Ketal meets the order with a steady look, and acknowledges that he understands the rule. The ritual's authority hangs over them both, as they prepare to speak plainly. A private conversation unfolds beneath the god's unblinking eye as Ketal details the dungeon clearing process he performed. He repeats the same explanation he gave before, and once more the sun god's sight returns no denial. Aquaz listens closely, the verification confirming the sincerity of his account. Because the divine gaze denied no falsehood, Aquaz concludes that Ketia spoke sincerely about the dungeon and Kartos' condition. She reasons that Kartos must have been severely weakened during the resurrection preparations, which explains the barbarian's appearance. Aquaz then asks plainly whether Ketal's answers have cleared her doubts. Aquaz thanks Ketal for his openness and requests one personal confirmation. She asks whether he truly hails from the White Snowfield, a question that carries more consequence than it appears. Ketal remains composed and prepared to answer the direct inquiry. Ketal confirms that he comes from the White Snowfield, and Aquaz's mind jumps to the legends of the demon realm and the gray barbarian the emperor once mentioned. The revelation tightens the stakes in the room, and Aquaz returns the question by asking why he came to this territory. Ketal starts to answer, faltering as the implications settle over them both. Aquaz admits her presence was for personal business, and Ketal cuts to the point by asking whether that business was to verify if he was unclean. The bluntness of the question forces Aquaz to confront the real motive behind the oracle and the ritual. She holds her silence while the question hangs in the golden light. Ketal claims he does not understand what Aquaz means, even as the memory of the sun god's eye lingers between them. Aquaz thinks of that divine scrutiny and its capacity to strip away falsehood. The image of Ketal beneath the god's gaze remains the silent proof they both must reckon with. Ketal points out that a god's direct observation is not merely about catching lies, but about a deeper form of revelation. Aquaz admits that under the eye falsehood cannot stand, and she agrees that his point is valid. He asks whether he was the intended focus from the start, and Aquaz denies that was the only reason she sought verification. Aquaz confesses that an oracle prompted her actions, and that she initially suspected Ketal might be the figure named in that prophecy. She apologizes for hiding her true intention during the meeting, and the apology is sincere. Ketal accepts the explanation as interesting in its own right, and asks that she reveal the oracle's message. Ketal demands to know the oracle's exact message, and Aquaz hesitates because such revelations are normally guarded. She steadies herself, gripping the sun god medallion, and decides to disclose the content to someone she now trusts. The air tightens as she prepares to speak the oracle's words aloud. Golden fragments of the oracle's message float through the room and reach Ketal with an uncanny clarity. His face changes almost immediately, the shock of what he hears making the moment feel heavier than any ritual before. The scene cuts to a void of gravity, as the implication of the oracle settles over everyone present. After the oracle's words, Aquaz steps to the window and gathers herself in the quiet light. Footsteps announce another presence, and a man addresses her with the title Lord as he enters the chamber. The arrival shifts the private interrogation into a matter that now concerns the realm's leadership. The Lord notes Aqua's troubled state and asks what has unsettled her. She admits that her private meeting with Ketal only muddied her thoughts further. When pressed for identity, she confirms that Ketal is indeed a barbarian from the White Snowfield, a truth that raises immediate concern at court. The Lord warns that news of a confirmed Snowfield barbarian would ignite widespread ambition, and that many would race to explore the region. He singles out the Emperor as especially likely to react personally, which could trigger chaos across the realm. Aquaz hears the implication and understands why discretion is urgent. The Lord reassures Aquaz that the court will manage Kartos and that they intend to conceal the barbarian's existence from the public. Aqua allows herself a moment of relief at the promise of secrecy. The Lord then asks whether all Snowfield barbarians share Ketal's qualities, probing the larger strategic risk. Aquaz explains that most barbarians possess great physical strength, but not the strategic intellect to threaten the world. She points out that if those physically dominant beings also developed high intelligence, their potential would be catastrophic. The possibility that such beings could emerge is the unspoken danger beneath their discussion. The Lord mentions rumors that the barbarian king combines brute strength with unusual intelligence, a combination that alarms them both. Aquaz confirms she met that king once and found him undeniably different from typical barbarians. They both consider how dangerous or interesting it would be if such figures crossed paths. The Lord argues that the dynamic between barbarians and those who serve gods is fraught, and that the growing power of such groups cannot be dismissed. Aquaz agrees that the issue demands serious attention and the private meeting was justified. When asked what the oracle said to prompt secrecy, she pauses before replying. Aquaz explains her motive plainly. She needed to determine whether Ketal was a genuine human from the Snowfield or something only appearing human. That distinction, she says, would change how they respond. The Lord presses for the oracle's exact wording, and Aquaz begins to disclose it to him alone. Fragments of the oracle's message spill into the chamber and land with a chill that makes the Lord visibly recoil. He cannot hide his shock at the implication of what he hears, and asks how such a thing could be. The revelation points toward an unsettling truth connected to the Snowfield, one that the court had not expected. The scene shifts to a formal audience in the Lord's hall, where the Lord receives Ketal and opens with a polite inquiry about his well-being. Ketal answers that he is doing fine, and the conversation turns to matters of business. The meeting takes on a measured, official tone as the Lord prepares to address the reward for saving the territory. Ketal greets the Lord casually and asks why he was summoned, showing little expectation. The Lord admits he has news, and that he has prepared a reward for Ketal's role in defending the territory. Ketal feigns indifference, but the Lord insists and prepares to present the compensation he promised. The Lord signals for the reward to be presented, and attendants bring forward a heavy sack, its contents hinted at by the rustle of material. Ketal's expression shifts from boredom to curiosity as he leans forward to inspect the gift. He recognizes the texture and murmurs that it is leather, while the attendants prepare the formal transfer of the Lord's gratitude.